Chapter 2584. Now he was cold and merciless. Other than that crazy Princess Jiyu, he showed no mercy to anyone else. He also held military power. Although the ministers were dissatisfied with him, they could not rebel against him. They could only helplessly agree with his decisions. Jun Liuye finally got his wish to marry Jiyu and made her his empress. Unfortunately, she was still in a daze and did not respond to anyone or anything. Jun Liuye could not even be intimate with her. Every time he got close to her, she would scream and tremble. She would have a major seizure. Jun Liuye naturally could not force her. He could only look at her from a distance. The person he loved was clearly by his side, but they were so close yet so far apart. Jun Liuye was undoubtedly an expert in governing a country. He was a born emperor. He had ascended the throne for less than half a year. After a round of bloody political changes, his country was finally stabilized. The political situation was stable and the people submitted to him. Everyone in the imperial court was his people. Aside from occasionally being dissatisfied with some of his actions, they were all loyal to him. After stabilizing the rear, he began to personally lead the troops to attack Xingyue country. Firstly, it was to take revenge for the previous incident. Secondly, it was to obtain a treasure from Xingyue country's palace, the Clear Spirit Pearl. It was said that this pearl was left behind by the emperor when he came to this continent a few hundred years ago. It was said that wearing this pearl could make one immortal. The emperor of Xingyue country had always worn it. His youthful appearance was due to this pearl. Jun Liuye was not interested in immortality. He only wanted this pearl because he heard of another effect of this pearl. It was said that swallowing this pearl could make even a fool smart. Jiyu was just crazy. Perhaps this pearl could make her return to normal. Xingyue country was the second strongest country in this continent. It was not much worse than Huiyue country. Although Huiyue country had annexed Jiyu country, its strength had increased greatly. It was not that easy to completely destroy Xingyue country. Moreover, the emperor of Xingyue country was also a valiant emperor. He was loved and respected by the people. He was also good at using people. He had countless soldiers and generals under his command. He was completely different from Jiyu country's emperor Full Moon, who did not have the support of the people. It was easy to imagine the difficulty of directly attacking such a country. When Jun Liuye personally led the troops, it was a snowy winter. Outside the city gate, the army stretched for several miles, and the banners were blazing. Not only were the civil and military officials sending them off, but there were also the families of the soldiers. When they parted, they were reluctant to part. This was especially true for the wives of the soldiers. Their eyes were brimming with tears as they repeatedly exhorted and exhorted. Jun Liuye rode alone on a tall horse. Dressed in black and wearing a silver mask, he looked exceptionally cold and lonely. His gaze swept over the soldiers who were reluctant to part with their families, and a touch of sadness flashed through his eyes. Naturally, there were many people who came to see him off, but none of them was the person he wanted. The battlefield was constantly changing and extremely dangerous, so it was naturally inconvenient for him to bring her along. Thus, he left her in the palace and entrusted her to a trusted confidant to take care of her, which was the most appropriate thing to do. Of course, he still couldn't resist going to her palace to bid her farewell that night. Just as he expected, no matter what he said to her, she did not respond at all, as if she did not hear him. Naturally, he would not tell him to be careful out of concern. Just like now, as his only empress, she would not send him off when he was about to go to war. It was time to set off. The soldiers regrouped and were ready to set off. Jun Liuye also turned his horse around and was about to lead the troops out. Chapter 2585. The soldiers regrouped and readied themselves. Jun Liuye also turned his horse around and was about to set off. Suddenly, he seemed to have sensed something and abruptly turned around. 2 women and a man were standing on the city gate tower. It was Jiyu Jun Lufeng and Xiao Hongxiang. Speaking of which, it was strange. After returning from Xingyue country halfway through her treatment, Jiyu did not reject the approach of other people, such as the maids who served her, or even Jun Lufeng and Xiao Hongxiang. She only rejected Jun Liuye. Right now the 3 of them were standing on top of the city gate tower. Jun Lufeng and Xiao Hongxiang were waving at him with all their might, and Jiyu, who had always treated him as nothing and never looked at him, was actually looking at him from afar. She placed her hand on the city wall and pursed her lips, looking at him like a normal person. Jun Liuye's body stiffened slightly as he stared at her from afar. His eyesight was good, and he could even see the slightest change in her expression. She seemed to be smiling. Jun Liuye's mind exploded. He actually leaped up from his horse. Under everyone's gaze, he flew up the tall city wall like a black eagle. He landed on the city gate tower and landed in front of Jiyu. It was only after he landed on the ground that he realized what he had done. He had actually done such a reckless thing, like a miserable youth who had just fallen in love for the first time. The people below the city gasped, but he didn't care and took a big step towards Jiyu. Jiyu. Jiyu, however, screamed as if she had been frightened. She took a few steps back and hid behind Hong Xiang. Her body trembled slightly and she no longer looked at him. This attitude was almost the same as when she saw him. Jun Liuya's eyes dimmed, and the hands that wanted to hug her slowly fell. Jun Lufeng tried to smooth things over. "Royal brother, take care." Jun Liuya nodded. "Take good care of her at home." Jun Lufeng nodded solemnly. "Don't worry, royal brother. I won't let you down." Jun Liuya glanced at Jiyu, who was hiding behind Hong Xiang and refused to show her face. He then turned around and flew down the city wall. Swearing to sweep the world regardless of his own body, 5,000 officers and soldiers died in the smoke and dust. Sleeping at night with golden spears and iron clothes, blood stains the battlefield, all dead souls. 8 months passed in the blink of an eye. War had always been cruel, especially when it came to wars between countries. It was even more tragic. After every battle, there would be countless bones and souls left on the battlefield. Although Jun Liuya was very good at leading troops into battle, the other side was not easy to deal with. His attack was not particularly successful, and in the 8 months since the start of the war, he had already lost tens of thousands of soldiers. Of course, the other side had suffered even more losses, twice as many as him. Moreover, he had also taken down countless cities. His army was slowly approaching the capital of Star Moon Nation, the City of Stars. At Qinjia Pass, his army encountered the most tenacious resistance. The Qinjia Pass was an important gateway to the vast Star City. As long as the Qinjia Pass was taken down, then the vast Star City would be just around the corner. Ning Xuema followed Xinjiuli to read Jun Liuya's memories. Naturally, she saw many war scenes. Even though she was used to seeing the world, she still frowned slightly. One of Xinjiuli's arms was wrapped around her, while the other was placed on Jun Liuya's forehead to read his memories. He seemed to feel the change in Ning Xuema's mood. He glanced at her and suddenly said, "Do you want to change the way I read your memories?" Ning Xuema did not expect him to be able to speak so casually at this time. She could not help but look at Jun Liuya. Jun Liuya closed his eyes and stood there motionless like an old monk. Chapter 2586. It was clear that Xinjiuli had brought her directly into his memories. She hadn't been awakened by Xinjiuli. "How do I change?" Xinjiuli's voice was still casual. "Just go in." Before Ning Xuema could react, a white light flashed in front of her eyes. When she came back to her senses, she found herself floating in the air, and Xinjiuli was beside her, still holding her waist. There was a huge purple moon in the sky, and below them were endless battlefields and tents. "Where are we?" In Jun Liuya's memories. Xinjiuli's answer was straightforward. The Almighty could actually pull her directly into someone's memories. A new skill. In one of the novels she had read, if the main character wanted to enter someone's memories, he had to play a specific song and use blood as a guide. The procedures were very complicated. She didn't expect that the Almighty would directly pull her in. He didn't even make a gesture. And her Almighty was even more awesome. Ning Xuema's eyes sparkled as she stared at Xinjiuli. She almost had stars in her eyes. Xinjiuli put an arm on her shoulder and asked lazily, "You look like you admire me a lot?" Ning Xuema nodded without hesitation. "Almighty, you are my idol." Xinjiuli's eyes flashed with a smile. His wife seeing him as an idol naturally made him very happy. He accepted all her praises and replied with a single word, She praised him for so long and he only replied with This was too perfunctory. Ning Xuema was a little dissatisfied. She looked at him. "Almighty, what am I to you?" She wanted to get a compliment from Xinjiuli such as "you are my pride," or something. Xinjiuli didn't even think about it and replied with a single word, "Wife." "Ning Xuema." Xinjiuli glanced at her. As if he could see her disappointment, he changed the word, "wifey." Ning Xuema pursed her lips even tighter. She seemed even more displeased. Xinjiuli thought about it seriously this time and thought of another word, "wife." Ning Xuema was speechless. It seemed like getting a compliment from the Almighty was harder than ascending to the heavens. Forget it, she didn't want to make things difficult for the Almighty. The Almighty wasn't someone who would easily praise others. Moreover, the title of the Almighty's wife wasn't too bad. She patted her mouth and said, "All right, I won't force you anymore. I know I'm your wife, your wife, your wife." Before she could finish, Shinjuli interrupted her. He smiled and looked at her, his eyes serious. You are still my one and only, my life. Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat. Who said that the Almighty couldn't say sweet nothings? Once he said those words of love, it would really make her heart beat faster. She was obviously thick-skinned and didn't blush easily, but under the teasing of the Almighty's words she actually blushed. You're blushing? Shinjuli looked at her with a faint smile and even pinched her cheeks. How could Ning Xuema admit it? What's there to blush about? It's just that the weather is too hot and I'm wearing thick clothes? She casually found an excuse. Hot weather? Wearing thick clothes? Shinjuli repeated the question twice. The smile on his face widened. This place was extremely remote and had a cold climate. Although it was August, the north wind was still blowing and there was even snow in some places. Ning Xuema was wearing a thin chiffon dress. The sleeves were fluttering, but it couldn't be considered thick. If it was any thinner, she would be running around naked. Ning Xuema quickly realized this. Chapter 2587. Ning Xuema quickly realized this as well. Seeing the Almighty's teasing gaze, even the tips of her ears turned red. Taking a deep breath, she forced herself to calm down. This is someone else's memory after all. The weather is abnormal, so my feelings are also abnormal. Looking up, she saw Shinjuli looking at her deeply. His eyes were very deep, and there was a familiar burning heat in them. Her heart skipped a beat, and she tried to pull her hand away. I can make you even hotter, Shinjuli slowly said. Using a bit of force, he pulled her into his arms and kissed her. Ning Xuema froze. The Almighty had only returned to his original form this morning. He had not had the chance to be intimate with her before he came to this ice cave with Jun Lioya. With a third person present and busy reading Jiyu's memory, the two did not cross the line. Of course, the Almighty had his arm around her waist and was very intimate with her. But to Shinjuli this was clearly not enough. Now that he finally had the chance, he naturally kissed her to his heart's content. Ning Xuema still had some misgivings, so she forced her mouth open. Almighty were still in someone else's memory. Below them was a bustling military camp. Although they were in midair, the people below should be able to see them clearly if they looked up, okay? Don't worry, the people here won't see us. Shinjuli captured her mouth and blurted out, focus. Thus Ning Xuema focused. Not only that, she even reached out and wrapped her arms around his neck, passionately responding to him. Shinjuli's eyes flashed with a smile, but the bottom of his eyes deepened and burned with passion. The kiss deepened. Amidst the intense entanglement of their tongues, he suddenly put her down and turned her over to press her against the clouds. With a wave of his hand, her clothes disappeared, his warm body pressed against hers. Ning Xuema, who had been kissed senselessly by him, was now somewhat sober. She hurriedly reached out to push him away. Almighty, we're here to look at his memories? Shinjuli glanced down and saw that there was a fierce battle going on below. It doesn't matter. His memories are still going on. It's not a big deal. Come look at me. Shinjuli's incomparably handsome face was right in front of her. His eyes were as deep as the ocean, as if they were going to swallow her whole. Although Ning Xuema had been intimate with him countless times, being stared at by him like this still made her heart beat faster and her blood boil. She didn't say anything but stretched out her arms and hugged him tightly. She raised her body and kissed the tip of his nose. Her eyes were brighter than the stars in the sky, and her face was redder than the rosy clouds on the horizon. Shinjuli couldn't help but smile. He loved her so much that he wanted to be with her all the time. He wanted to become one with her. No matter how close he got, he felt that it wasn't enough. Perhaps only a zero distance or a negative distance could fill each other's hearts. I'm in you and you're in me. There was a breeze in the sky and a few clouds were blown over, blocking the intense entanglement between the two of them. They didn't know how much time had passed and the scene below had changed countless times. However, the clouds that enveloped the two of them didn't change at all. Finally, the clouds slowly dispersed, revealing the two of them inside. Ning Xuema was still sitting in his arms. Both of them were neatly dressed and Ning Xuema was still panting slightly. Even with her great physical strength, her waist was still sore after this round. Her body was extremely weak, and she didn't want to get up from the Almighty's embrace. Chapter 2588. Shinjuli sat there with his arms around her. He looked like a cat that was content with its life. Ning Xuema rubbed her waist and complained, just now you were too torturous. I clearly told you to stop. Shinjuli used his fingertips to pick up a strand of her hair and played with it in his palm. He leisurely said, Didn't you say that girls often say one thing and mean another? Then when you said stop, you actually meant that you wanted me to continue. Ning Shuema. Great God, you're too shameless. You actually used these words to stop her. She moved her body. The white cloud below her was soft and very comfortable. She suddenly thought of a very important question. Great God, I remember that after I came to this world my psychokinesis disappeared. How can I still sit on the white cloud so freely? Because we're now in spirit bodies and not physical bodies. Shinjuli explained to her. Ning Shuema was shocked. You're saying that our bodies are still in the cave? Smart. Shinjuli praised her. She actually used her spirit body to make love with the great God once. The great God said that using this method to read her memories was more convenient, but it was actually more convenient to be intimate with her, right? The great God was indeed the great God, so two-faced. She looked down and changed the topic. What's the next step? Shinjuli casually replied. Jun Liuya and Xingyu country's defenders fought 3 more times. They won 2 times and killed 30,000 of the enemy. Now they're besieging the city. The great God was so busy just now, but he still saw it so clearly. Great God, you weren't focused. Ning Shuema finally caught Shinjuli's weakness. She was originally the least focused. Later, under his powerful attacks, she couldn't pay attention to her surroundings. She didn't even know where she was. Shinjuli's eyes flashed. Wifey, you're saying that you're not satisfied with your husband's performance just now? He looked like he would do it again as soon as she said she wasn't satisfied. Ning Shuema hurriedly waved her hand. I'm satisfied. I can't be more satisfied. Shinjuli smiled. He stretched out his long legs and leaned over to kiss her on the cheek. Thank you for your praise, my wife. Ning Shuema didn't dare to linger on this topic. She pulled his hand and said, let's go down and take a look. I'm actually not interested in how Jun Liuya fights. I'm only interested in Jiyu's death. She was already crazy. Who would want to poison her? Oh right, Almighty, I didn't expect you to be involved in their story. Shinjuli's eyes flickered slightly as he said indifferently, perhaps this is the reason why we are here. Ning Shuema's eyes lit up. Are you saying that they might be our second pair of quests? Shinjuli nodded. That's right. The Heavenly Lost Stone had said that this kind of quest was to set things right. It was to change the outcome of his original participation. A few hundred years ago, there were 3 countries on this continent. He felt that it was quite good. In order to maintain this situation, he gave each country a gift that didn't belong to this world. Xingyue country had the clear spirit pearl, Jiyu country had the city protection crystal, and Huiyue country had the sky-changing bow. These 3 treasures each had their own powerful uses. They could protect the peace of a region. Because of this, the 3 countries maintained this state for several hundred years. It was only when Jun Liuya appeared that this delicate balance was broken. In fact, the world situation was bound to be divided after a long period of union, and united after a long period of separation. Originally, the 3 countries wouldn't have existed for too long. If Shinjuli hadn't left behind these 3 treasures, this situation would have been broken in a few decades. Then, a hegemon would have truly unified the 3 countries. Chapter 2589. If Jiyu didn't have the city protecting crystal, Jun Liuya wouldn't have known Princess Jiyu and all of this wouldn't have happened. Ning Shuemo rubbed her forehead. I don't think it's good to help this pair. There's not only a misunderstanding between them, but also a grudge against their country. Even if Jiyu revives, she might not be willing to be with Jun Liuya again unless she completely loses her memories. Great God, you're not thinking of erasing her memories after saving her, are you? Shinjuli's tone was light. I won't. My task is to let them return to their original path, not necessarily to help them. Original path? Then shouldn't these 2 people not know each other? But they already know each other and have such deep entanglements. How is Great God going to set things right? Ning Shuema was in a daze for a while before looking down. Suddenly her eyes widened. Why is Jun Liuya losing? Below, Jun Liuya's army was like a sheet of loose sand, retreating 100 li. Only then did they once again set up camp. Jun Liuya's military talent was comparable to Zhuge Liang's. Ning Shuema had never seen him lose a battle. This was the first time he was in such a sorry state. Looking at the state of these soldiers, it was obvious that the commander was not in a good position. What's going on? Shinjuli also glanced down. Last night, Jun Liuya received a secret letter from the capital saying that Princess Jiyu went missing. Ning Shuema suddenly understood. Only Jiyu's matter could cause Jun Liuya to act so abnormally. But Jiyu was a fool and shouldn't have run around. Jun Lufeng was also a meticulous person. With him watching over Jiyu, logically speaking, it was impossible for her to go missing. Unless someone was unhappy with Jiyu and secretly harmed her. But no matter if it was the imperial court or the harem, they were all sincerely convinced by Jun Lioye and didn't dare to provoke him. Everyone knew that Jiyu was at the top of his heart and couldn't be neglected. Who would be so blind as to poke this hornet's nest? Or perhaps, great God, do you have any ideas? Shinjioli shook his head slightly and said straightforwardly, no, I'm not interested in other women's movements. This is Jun Lioye's memory. Things have already happened so we can only watch. Ning Shuema. The Almighty was indeed the Almighty. When he didn't want to use his brain he was still very lazy. She looked down and her heart skipped a beat. Most of Jun Lioye's memories seemed to be fast-forwarded, with many scenes flashing by. Ning Shuema felt as if she had pressed the fast-forward button when she was looking at it earlier. Only when it was something extremely important or something that left a deep impression on him would the image pause for a long time. But now the image below was clear and slow. Every scene was extremely clear. Ning Shuema looked down, then looked at the large moon. Could it be that this night had left a deep impression on Jun Lioye? She pulled Shinjioli. Guru, let's go down and take a look. The central tent was brightly lit. Jun Lioye was dressed in martial attire as he sat behind the commander's desk. His face was as calm as water as he asked the subordinates kneeling below, still no news. Your Majesty, all of Shadow Tower's spies have been sent out to search the capital streets and alleys, but they still haven't found the Empress's whereabouts. Your Majesty, the news from the capital said that the Empress was still fine 10 days ago. Who would have thought that she would disappear the next morning? None of her maids saw how she went missing. Chapter 2590. This matter is indeed strange. The Empress residence has a large array. Those who aren't familiar with the terrain can't sneak in, and the Empress servants are all carefully selected. They are the most suitable people, so it's impossible for them to betray their master. The 8th prince has already imprisoned all the related people and used a secret technique to interrogate them. No one saw how the Empress left. Jun Lufeng had a secret technique to interrogate people. No matter how tightly sealed their mouths were, he could still pry them open and make them tell the truth. Since he used this secret technique to interrogate them, it proved that those people were indeed innocent. But how did the crazy Jiyu disappear? Unless, Jun Lioye's face was pale as he clenched his fists. Unless, she escaped on her own? But she was still crazy, so how could she escape on her own? Your Majesty, outside, there is someone outside who wants to see you. She said she is Jiyu? Princess Jiyu? A soldier suddenly ran in and stammered. What? Jun Lioye suddenly stood up. The other trusted generals in the tent also opened their mouths wide, as if they could swallow a duck's egg. Jun Lioye almost rushed out. Then he stopped in his tracks and stared in one direction, holding his breath. Outside the tent, under the moonlight, stood a woman. She was wearing a light red robe. Her black hair fell to her forehead, and her eyebrows were like a painting. She stood there quietly, like an ink painting slowly unfolding under the moonlight. She still looked the same as before. Hearing the noise, she raised her head and a pair of bright eyes looked at Jun Lioye. She smiled like a flower, 1,000 deaths. Jun Lioye staggered for a moment, then slowly walked over. Jiyu tilted her head and looked at him. Her cheeks were red and so were her lips. Jiyu? He reached out his arms and tightly held her in his embrace, as if she would suddenly grow wings and run away. Jiyu was almost unable to breathe from his embrace. She reached out her small fist and hit him twice. Let go, there are so many people here. Jun Lioye's arms loosened slightly. Of course he didn't let go of her. He looked into her eyes as if he wanted to confirm something. Her large eyes were very clear like crystals. Under his gaze, her cheeks turned red. What are you looking at? She didn't look like she was faking it, and she didn't know how to fake it. Jun Lioye suddenly bent down and picked her up horizontally. She cried out in surprise and wrapped her arms around her chest. Her body slightly curled up in his embrace, but she immediately struggled. Hey, let go. There are still so many of your subordinates here. Jun Lioye looked at her deeply, his eyes darkening. Then he chuckled. What subordinate? Isn't it just you and me here? Jiyu was taken aback for a moment. She turned her head and looked around. She found that there was no one around. No one wanted to be a third wheel at this time. They all scattered like birds and beasts, leaving only him and her in front of the main tent. Jun Lioye carried her into the bedchamber. This place was bitterly cold and Jiyu's clothes were not thick, so her hands and feet were cold. The tent was as warm as spring. Ji-yu sat on Jun Lioye's bed, wrapped in a thick, soft blanket. She leaned on Jun Lioye's body, looking very comfortable. Jun Lioye was still not at ease, so he got up and poured her a cup of warm wine. He directly put it to her lips and said, "Come, drink this first to warm yourself up." Ji-yu obediently took a sip from his hand and wrinkled her beautiful brows. "So spicy." Jun Lioye's eyes were apologetic. "There's no wine for girls in the army?" Chapter 2591. He stood up again. "Wait a moment, I'll get someone to buy your favorite lotus fragrance wine." The military was filled with hot-blooded men who loved to drink the strongest alcohol. Naturally, they would prepare this type of wine. Ji-yu pulled him back. "Forget it. Don't make this special for me." She tugged at the corner of his shirt and looked him up and down. Pursing her lips, she said, "You seem to have gotten darker and thinner. The war must be tough, right?" Jun Lioye kept looking at her. Suddenly he sighed and hugged her. Rubbing his chin on her head, he said, "It's not tough, Ji-yu. Now that you're here, it's not tough at all." "Guru, do you think Ji-yu lost her memory after recovering from her illness?" Ning Xuema and Shin Jiuli floated at the top of the tent. Relying on the fact that no one could see them, Ning Xuema looked down and judged. Shin Jiuli glanced at the two hugging below and answered with a few words, "It's a good thing if she really lost her memory." Ning Xuema sighed. "That's true. The two of them were separated by a great national grudge. If Ji-yu didn't lose her memory, why would she be willing to be with him? Why would she come looking for him? If she really lost her memory, then those injuries wouldn't exist for her. But did she really lose her memory?" Ning Xuema looked at Jun Lioye. He had probably noticed Ji-yu's abnormality, but she didn't know how he felt right now. His beloved's illness was finally cured. He finally had a chance to explain to her, but she lost her memory again. Looking at her appearance, she didn't remember the injuries at all. How was Jun Lioye going to explain it to her? Ning Xuema was guessing when the guru's voice suddenly rang out. "No need to watch, let's go outside and wait." Ning Xuema was stunned and she was already outside the tent. "Guru, this memory is so clear. It's obviously important. I think we should watch the whole thing." Ning Xuema was still unwilling to give up. Shin Jiuli pulled her into his arms and said directly, "I don't like you staring at other men. Don't worry, they will come out again." "The great god's possessiveness," Ning Xuema said helplessly. "If you don't want me to look, then I can at least listen, right? Shall we go and listen?" Shin Jiuli looked at her and suddenly smiled slowly. "Xuema, so this is your taste." Which one?" Ning Xuema was confused. "You like to eavesdrop." Shin Jiuli slowly opened his mouth with a smile that was not a smile. Ning Xuema was speechless. Originally, it was an honorable matter. How could the great god make it sound vulgar? "Ji-yu, how did you get here?" Jun Lioye's voice came through the wind. Ning Xuema was stunned. She was currently 200 meters away from the tent. Logically speaking, she shouldn't be able to hear what the people in the tent were saying. She looked at Shin Jiuli and Shin Jiuli pulled her to sit down. "Since you want to listen, then listen here." So it was the great god's doing. Aside from the great god, there probably wasn't a second person who could do as he pleased in other people's memories. Ning Xuema fell into Shin Jiuli's arms. She openly eavesdropped while praising him in satisfaction. "Great god, you're really perverted." Shin Jiuli didn't mind. "Thanks for your praise. Your husband will be perverted again tonight." Ning Xuema was speechless. Alright, she shouldn't bicker with the great god. She should just focus on eavesdropping on the two people in the tent. Chapter 2592. Qian Shang, there's something strange. I seem to have slept for a long time, and after I woke up, I seem to have forgotten some things. However, it's a good thing that I still remember you. I remember that you promised to marry me, and you really did marry me. However, my memories are hazy, and there are many things that I only remember in bits and pieces. Am I sick? After a while, she heard Jun Lioye's gentle reply, "And you're sick." After I woke up, I found out that you led an army to attack Xingyu country, so I ran out of the palace to find you. Qian Shang, why didn't you bring me to war? Jiyu's voice had a trace of grievance. Marching and fighting is very tiring, Jiyu, I didn't want you to suffer. Liar, it's clearly you who didn't want me. Jiyu, I missed you and I never forgot you. There was some movement in the tent and after a while, Jiyu's low cry of surprise was heard. You, woo. Jiyu, I'll let you understand how much I missed you. Jun Lioye's voice was very dark, and then there was a sound that made people's faces turn red. It seemed that Jun Lioye had pushed Jiyu down. The sound suddenly disappeared and only the sound of the wind could be heard. Ning Shuema looked at the great god from the corner of her eyes, but the great god's expression did not change and he only said 4 words, "It's not suitable for children." Ning Shuema. Great God, how many times have you done such things that are not suitable for children? She listened carefully again, but she really couldn't hear anything, so she gave up. When she read Jiyu's memories with the great god, there were also some intimate scenes. She was originally very interested, but every time that happened the great god would use a spell to cover it up. The great god's mosaic was better than anyone else's, so Ning Shuema couldn't even see a hazy shadow. Now that it was like this again, Ning Shuema also knew that it was useless to argue. She suddenly thought of a question. Great God, when you read Jiyu's memories just now, why didn't you use this method? She felt that this method was more immersive, and she could also talk to the great God casually. It was more than a level higher than the old method. Shinjuli rested his head on her shoulder and replied lazily, "This method can only be used on living people. It's useless on dead people." Ning Shuema understood. Shinjuli looked at her with an ambiguous smile in his eyes. "You suddenly asked this question. Did you want me to use this method for a long time?" Ning Shuema. She recalled that when she first entered this memory realm, the Almighty had pushed her down without saying a word, her pretty face tensed up and she pushed him away. She righteously said, "Great God, you're too perverted." Shinjuli. He rested his head on his hand. "I just think that this method is the most convenient to read memories. What are you thinking?" Ning Shuema. She looked at the tent in the distance that should be overflowing with spring. The 2 people inside shouldn't be doing anything for the time being. They probably wouldn't be done without 2 hours. She thought for a moment and reached out to touch the Almighty's chest. Shinjuli let her touch him and didn't forget to tease her. "You want it again? Want your head?" Ning Shuema took out a chess set from his chest. "Great God, the night is long and I'm not in the mood to sleep. Let's play a few games of chess." The Almighty's storage space was open to her, but every time she needed something, the Almighty would let her take it herself. She wanted to touch his chest. At first she was a little uncomfortable, but now she felt very natural. Chapter 2593. She placed the chessboard on the table and sat down across from him. Cupping her hands she said, "Ancestor, please." Shinjuli sat in place, not intending to make a move. "You don't want to continue watching their story? They won't be able to finish it in a short time." Ning Shuemo replied indifferently, but she suddenly stopped because she heard a voice from the tent. "Jiyu, I won't force you." Jun Lioye seemed to be suppressing something. "I'm sorry." Jiyu's voice trembled. "I know we're already married, but I don't have any memories of this. I'm a little scared." "It's fine, we'll have plenty of time in the future." Jun Lioye's voice had already returned to normal. "Chen Shang, you love me so much. I'm very happy." Jiyu's voice was sweet, but she suddenly changed the topic. "Do you remember what day it is today?" Jun Lioye paused. "Today? Is the Purple Moon Festival?" "Yes, Chen Shang, today is the Purple Moon Festival. Let's go out and admire the moon together, okay? You said you wanted to take me to Star Moon Country's mountain to admire the moon. You even said the moon here is unique and beautiful. Can you take me there?" Jun Lioye readily agreed. Of course. Wait a moment, I'll go arrange it first." "Good." Once the tent door opened, Jun Lioye walked out. He called 2 of his trusted aides and gave them a few instructions before returning to the tent. A moment later he and Jiyu walked out hand in hand. The weather outside was quite cold, but the 2 were in high spirits. The 2 had changed their clothes. Jun Lioye was wearing a loose blue robe that fluttered in the wind behind him, looking elegant and romantic. Jiyu was wearing a pink dress with a white fox cloak on the outside. The snow-white fur contrasted with her captivating red face, making her even more stunning. Ning Shuema's gaze fell on Jun Lioye and her eyes suddenly narrowed. The current Jun Lioye's temperament gave her a faint feeling of familiarity, but she couldn't recall who it was. Jun Lioye's army was stationed in the valley. Behind the camp was a towering mountain that looked like a silent giant beast in the night. "Jiyu, where do you want to go?" Jun Lioye held her waist. Jiyu looked around, unable to make up her mind. "You're familiar with the terrain here, so let's find the tallest mountain. It was more interesting to admire the moon from the peak." Jun Lioye also looked at the peak in the distance. The highest peak is outside the camp." Jiyu looked at him and said, "Will it be dangerous?" "If it's dangerous, then don't go." Jun Lioye's gaze focused on her face and he smiled. "It's okay. It's worth it no matter how big the risk is for you." His smile was the same as before, with an indescribable doting. Jiyu looked away and leaned her head on his shoulder. Xian Shang, you're so good to me. Pain flashed across Jun Liuya's eyes, but he quickly smiled and led her away. Let's go. The two of them walked slowly in front while Jun Liuya's 4 personal guards followed them from a distance. After walking for a while, Jiyu occasionally turned back and saw the 4 guards. She then turned back to look at Jun Liuya. We're admiring the moon. Should we let them follow? Jun Liuya paused in his steps and waved at the 4 guards behind him, indicating for them to wait where they were. The guard captain was still worried. Your Majesty, it's wartime now. I'm afraid it's not safe outside the camp. Why don't we bring a team of guards with us? Jun Liuya looked at Jiyu. Chapter 2594. Jun Liuya looked at Jiyu. Jiyu pursed her lips. I don't like being watched when admiring the moon. However, Your Majesty's safety is also very important. If Your Majesty wants them to follow, then let them follow. Jun Liuya looked at her for a moment and smiled. He said softly, I don't like being watched either. Jiyu, let's go. You don't have to follow. Holding her hand, they gradually walked away. The guards followed for 2 steps, but they didn't dare to disobey His Majesty's order. They could only stop. Because there was a battle just now, they could still see fallen corpses along the way. Each of them looked hideous and incomplete. There were soldiers who specialized in dealing with the aftermath of the battle, collecting them. Seeing His Majesty coming with a woman, these soldiers all bowed and saluted. Jun Liuya just waved his hand and let them do their thing. He then left with Jiyu. Turning his head, he saw that Jiyu's face was slightly pale. He pulled her into his arms. Scared? Jiyu said, They're bloody. Before she could finish, Jun Liuya bent over and picked her up. Her face was buried in his chest. His heartbeat was steady and his voice was also steady. These don't suit you. Don't look. His figure rose and like a fluttering wind, he carried her and flew into the depths of the mountain. He was afraid of scaring Jiyu again, so he went far away from the battlefield. However, this would require him to walk more than 10 miles. Why must we fight? Jiyu leaned in his arms, her voice a little muffled. It's good to live a peaceful life. The people can live and work in peace. Jun Liuya's footsteps paused slightly, but he didn't say anything. Jiyu raised her head in his arms. I heard that you attacked Xingyue country this time to cure my illness. Is that true? Jun Liuya looked down at her. Who told you that? Because he was afraid that the king of Xingyue country would destroy the pearl if he knew, Jun Liuya never told anyone his purpose. Only his true confidants knew where Jiyu got this information from. Jiyu blinked. It's the 8th prince. Did I say something wrong? Jun Liuya breathed a sigh of relief. He did tell Jun Lufeng. Jun Lufeng always thought that Jiyu was crazy and didn't like to talk, so it was possible that he talked in front of her. He said softly, That's right. Star Moon Country has a pearl that can cure your illness. But I'm fine now, so I don't need that bead anymore. So let's not fight anymore, right? Jiyu looked at him seriously. Jun Liuya did not say anything. The war had been going on for so long. As long as they could win this battle, they would be able to march straight into the capital of Star Moon Nation, completely destroy Star Moon Nation and unify this continent. This had always been his dream, and it was also the ultimate dream of his generals who had fought bloody battles for many years. Now, the entire army had suffered so many casualties and paid so much blood and lives for this battle. Seeing that victory was in sight, how could they retreat just like that? Jiyu looked at him for a moment and suddenly smiled. Okay, I was joking. Your ambition has always been great, and you have the ability to dominate the world. In the future, when you conquer the world, I hope that you can become an emperor for all eternity, and leave your name in history for hundreds of generations. Jiyu, Jun Liuya muttered to himself. Just as he was about to say something, Jiyu reached out a finger and touched his lips. Okay, let's not talk about this anymore. The moon is beautiful tonight, so let's focus on looking at the moon. It was such a beautiful night, so it was better not to talk about these disappointing things. He still had many things to explain to her in the future. They still had plenty of time in the future. A little earlier today. Eager, sincere, begging for a monthly vote, a recommendation vote. My dear little masters, please give the monthly vote to Mumu. Chapter 2595. All right. Jun Liuya revealed a smile and lowered his head to gently kiss her lips. We'll talk about it later. Seeing that his lover was fine, Jun Liuya didn't care about anything else and just wanted to make her happy. The snowy peaks were covered in snow with ice towers and ice mushrooms everywhere. The moon was bright and the mountain was high. Standing on this ice peak, the moon seemed much bigger and brighter. The moonlight here was truly beautiful. The faint purple moonlight fell on the ice peak and reflected a strange light, just like a crystal palace. Jiyu stood on an ice tower and looked up at the purple moon in the sky, as if she was entranced. Jun Lioye was looking at her. The moon here is really beautiful. It's like a painting. Jiyu turned around on the ice peak. Her skirt fluttered in the wind, like a flower blooming in the moonlight. Jun Lioye simply sat down. You're even more beautiful than the moon. He sat in a lazy and carefree manner. His blue robe fluttered in the wind, making him look like an immortal. At this time he was no longer the decisive Iron-Blood Azura war general, but rather the king of assassins Yi Qianshang, who had doted on her, loved her, and liked to tease her, but also held her in his hands. Jiyu tilted her head to look at him. Your mouth is as sweet as before. Jun Lioye stretched out his legs and waved his hand at her. It's cold up there, I'll hold you and watch from below. Jiyu shook her head. You'll see the truth when you stand high, isn't that right? Her words seemed to imply something. Jun Lioye raised his head and looked at her for a moment. Suddenly he got up and flew straight to her side. He hugged her waist and said, Then I'll watch it with you. The two figures on the ice tower were leaning against each other. He was tall and handsome while she was petite. The moonlight fell on them like water, creating a beautiful scene. Ning Xuema was invisible in the air as she watched the pair below. She couldn't help letting out a sigh. Great God, don't you feel like something is wrong? Shun Jiuli declined to comment. Something's wrong. Let's watch the play. The two people below stood on the ice tower and looked at the moon for a while. Jun Lioye said, Jiyu, in the future I will take you to see all the moons on this continent. They all have their own characteristics. Jiyu smiled and looked at him from the side. Under the moonlight, her eyes were like water. I think that our Jiyu country's purple moon city's Huayu Tower's moon is the most beautiful. Don't you think so? Jun Lioye stiffened slightly. That place used to be the place where the crystal was enshrined. It was also the place where he used her to destroy Ziyu City's enchantment. That night, he accompanied her to watch the moon for half the night. It gave her the greatest happiness, but it also destroyed her home. After the city was breached, that place was also burned down by the Crown Prince's troops, leaving behind only broken walls and ruins. He thought that Jiyu would be traumatized by that place and would never want to go there again, so he didn't recultivate. Since she liked it, he would send someone to rebuild it and make it exactly the same. Jiyu, I'll take you there to see it in the future. Jun Lioye promised her and took the opportunity to hold her hand. Even though she was wearing so much, her little hand was still cold as if it would never be warmed up. Jun Lioye calmly channeled energy into his palm, making his palm like a small heater, trying to warm her hand up. Jiyu didn't say anything and didn't avoid him. She was staring at the moon in a daze. Her frequency of being in a daze was especially high today. Jun Lioye didn't say anything either. He simply hugged her and sat down on the ice peak. He rested his head on her shoulder and sighed softly. Jiyu, I never thought that we would have a day like this. Chapter 2596. He thought that she would be muddle-headed for the rest of her life, never talking to him again, never looking at him again. He never thought that there would be a time when they could lean on each other like this. God knows how long he had been longing for this moment. Jiyu came back to her senses and looked at him. Her eyes were as clear as water under the moonlight. Qian Shang? Jiyu, call me Lu Yi. His breath blew into her ears. He actually hoped that she would call him by his real name. After all, Yi Qianshang was only his alias. Jiyu paused and tilted her head to look at him for a bit. Jun Lu Yi? Your real name is more like you. What do you mean? Jun Lu Ye's breath was on her neck. My heart flows like the night. You were once a Shura general and Shuras belonged to the night. Jiyu actually began to drop her book bag. Jun Lu Yi was silent for a bit behind her before letting out a soft sigh. My thoughts are all on you right now. At this moment he was still the charming Yi Qianshang. His hand was supporting his head as he looked at her with a teasing gaze, but also a burning gaze. Jiyu's eyelashes trembled and half covered her eyes, making it hard for people to see her expression. She no longer looked at him and her face was a bit red. Are you shy? Jun Lu Yi reached out to hold her in his embrace. Jiyu, I hope that we can have this day every year. He didn't ask for anything else, he just wanted her to stay by his side. Her black hair was a bit cold. He rubbed his chin against her head and excitedly said, Jiyu, how about I help you style your hair? Jiyu paused for a bit before nodding. Jun Luyi straightened her body and used his fingers as a comb, beginning to comb her long hair. Her black hair was like silk, smooth and soft as it flowed through his fingers. After a while, her long hair was combed into a beautiful bun and a jade hairpin sparkled in her hair. You're quite skilled. Do you often help girls style their hair before? Jiyu rubbed her hair as she spoke in a half-joking manner. Idiot, I often helped you style your hair before. Jun Luye's voice was filled with pampering and helplessness. Jiyu's fingers stiffened, and then she touched the hairpin again. She was stunned for a moment, but she had already felt the shape and texture of the hairpin. It was the hairpin Yi Qianshang had given her. She had treated it like a treasure and would take it out to look at it several times a day. She was as happy as a fool. Now that the hairpin was back in her hair, she felt her scalp hurt from the cold. She seemed to be in a daze. Jun Liuya looked at her. Jiyu? Jiyu suddenly stood up, tilted her head and smiled at him, smiling innocently and charmingly. How about I dance for you? Jun Liuya clapped his hands. Good. I've long heard that your singing and dancing are superb. Today is a good opportunity to appreciate it. I'll accompany you. He took out a purple bamboo flute. The sound of the flute rang out faintly, like the rising of the wind and the blooming of flowers, drifting leisurely through the mountain peak. Ning Xuema looked down and saw his light blue robe fluttering in the wind like flowing water. The beautiful jade on his waist swayed slightly. He looked free and easy. His bearing made Ning Xuema feel like it was very familiar, like she had seen it before. She knew quite a few people, including all kinds of handsome men, but there were very few people with Jun Luye's bearing. Lazy and free with a faint trace of cynicism. Who did he resemble? Jun Luye's appearance and bearing were both very good. Ning Xuema thought that if she had seen him before, she would not have forgotten him. Chapter 2597. But looking at him now, he looked familiar, but no matter how she looked at it, she couldn't match him with the handsome guys in her mind. Could it be that he was a passerby she met 50,000 years ago? Ning Xuema didn't have many memories from 50,000 years ago. She only had memories of when she transmigrated, but her original memories from 50,000 years ago were only fragmented. Among these fragmented memories, there was no such person as Jun Liuya. A snow-white sleeve stretched out to block Ning Xuema's line of sight. She followed the sleeve and saw Shinjuli's eyes as deep as a lake. He was half sitting there with one arm supporting his head. His sleeve just happened to block Ning Xuema's line of sight, while his other hand was casually tapping the beat. Seeing Ning Xuema looking at him, he lazily said, "It's better to listen to the flute. There's no need to stare at it. Don't you think so?" Ning Xuema's eyes curved like crescent moons. The great god spoke in such a dignified manner, but he was actually jealous, right? She seized the opportunity to hug his sleeve and said in a deadpan manner, "And the great god is right. In the future, when the great god plays the zither, I'll just listen. There's no need to run over to look." Shinjuli, below, Jiyu had already begun to dance to the flute. The round moon in the sky was like a jade plate, and the snowy peaks on the ground were like crystals. In the midst of the white snow, Jiyu's red dress fluttered. The wind blew and her sleeves fluttered, making it seem as if she was flying. Twirling, bending, turning. Her slender body turned into all kinds of beautiful arcs, and her bright and beautiful eyes reflected the moonlight like shattered crystals on the lake. Jiyu's dancing was very good, far better than what Jun Liuya had expected. He felt that he had never seen such a beautiful dance in his life. His girl was like a ball of fire, a flower slowly blooming in this world of ice and snow, making him unable to move his eyes away. She fluttered in front of him and circled him 3 times. He looked at her with a smile, the sound of the flute clear and quiet, his eyes filled with affection. Ding! The jade hairpin on her head suddenly slipped off and fell to the icy ground, breaking into several pieces. The sound of the flute paused for a moment. She suddenly staggered and fell into his arms. He raised his arms, wanting to hug her, but his body suddenly stiffened. The sharp tip of a snow-white sword pierced through his back. Hot blood instantly flowed out, soaking his blue robe and staining her fingers that were holding the sword. Jiyu also seemed to be in a daze as she stared at the blood-stained sword hilt that had pierced into her opponent's body. Her fingertips trembled slightly, but she didn't retreat immediately. A large hand came over and grabbed her hand that was holding the sword. That hand held her tightly. She suddenly raised her head and looked into his long and narrow eyes. He was still in the same position as before. His left hand was holding the bamboo flute, and his right hand was holding her hand. He even hugged her with no intention of letting go. Of course, he had no intention of slapping her away. Even his eyes were calm, without much emotion. Jiyu, you didn't lose your memory? Jiyu's eyes slightly shrank. She suddenly raised her head and laughed. Of course. Junlioye, you also have a day like this. She laughed happily, as if she wanted to laugh out all the things that had been stuck in her heart these past few days. She succeeded. She had finally succeeded. She had finally killed this Azura. She had finally killed the enemy who had caused her family to be destroyed. She had finally made him pay the price he deserved. She should be happy, so she laughed louder and louder. She laughed until her voice changed pitch. Chapter 2598. Junlioye held her tightly and she didn't want to struggle. She wasn't afraid of him taking revenge on her and strangling her to death. Her greatest wish had been fulfilled and she no longer cared about life and death. What joy was there in life and what fear was there in death? She had struggled at death's door until now, all for this moment. More and more blood flowed out, and her hands became more and more sticky. The smell of blood filled her nose and she laughed until tears came out. Junlioye, so your blood is also red. Ning Xuema, who was watching from the side, also let out a soft sigh. She finally made a move. Shin Jiuli glanced at her. You knew she was going to make a move? Ning Xuema said, of course. She actually had 8 chances to make a move, but she missed them all. I was worried for her. Shin Jiuli was speechless. Ning Xuema sighed. The girl who was once as pure as crystal has actually learned how to act. Her acting is quite good and there are almost no flaws. Shin Jiuli put a hand on her shoulder. But it didn't escape your eyes, did it? Ning Xuema said, of course. I was the king of assassins in the past, and observing people's expressions is my forte. Although Jiyu's disguise was good, in the eyes of a professional agent like Ning Xuema, there were still many flaws. Shin Jiuli glanced at the 2 people below and said lightly, Junlioye is also the #1 expert in the world of assassins. In other words, if Ning Xuema could see through it, he might be able to see through it as well. Ning Xuema was startled. She understood what Shin Jiuli was trying to say. She shook her head. The IQ of a man and a woman in love will plummet. Those who are closely involved will not be able to see the situation clearly. Jiyu's disguise was good, and Junlioye might not have been able to see through it. Otherwise he wouldn't have taken that sword, right? Shin Jiuli pointed at the 2 people. Then did you see where Junlioye was stabbed? Ning Xuema frowned. I saw it clearly. It should be near the heart meridian. It's a critical place. However, Jiyu was probably still a little nervous, so the position of her sword was a little off. Otherwise, it would have taken Junlioye's life. Shin Jiuli shook his head slightly. It's not that she missed, but that Junlioye's muscles moved slightly to the side when she was stabbing at him, so the attack didn't hit his vitals. Ning Xuema. She didn't expect the Almighty to be even more observant than her. This perverted insight. However, with Junlioye's ability to adjust his muscles slightly, shouldn't he be able to completely dodge the attack? Then what? Ning Xuema thought of something and blurted out, he took Jiyu's sword on purpose. Shin Jiuli rubbed her hair in relief. Smart girl. Ning Xuema looked down at Junlioye with a complicated gaze. This person's thoughts were extremely meticulous. Everything he did was planned out before he acted. It could be said that he was watertight. Why did he take that sword on purpose? What was his plan? On the ice peak, Junlioye finally couldn't hold on any longer. His body slowly fell to the snow below his feet. Fresh blood gushed out from his body, quickly forming a small pool of blood. The white snow and the red blood were especially glaring. Jiyu finally jumped away from his body. She took a few steps back and tripped over something, falling to the ground with a plop. She seemed to have lost all her strength. Sitting there, she looked at Junlioye lying not far away, her gaze trembling slightly. Perhaps it was because he had lost too much blood, but Junlioye's face was as white as snow. His dark eyes looked at Jiyu as if whirlpools were swirling in them. His pale lips opened and closed a few times before he hoarsely said, Jiyu, like this, will you vent your anger? Chapter 2599. Jiyu's face had been flushed with excitement, but now it was slowly losing its color. She clenched her fists, her face even paler than his. Her palms were stained with blood and she subconsciously wiped them on the snow. She hatefully said, Junlioye, you owe me this. Although her words were fierce, her voice was trembling. Junlioye looked at her, his beautiful eyes half narrowed. His gaze was so deep that it made one's heart palpitate. You're right, I owe you. His voice became softer and softer, and finally, his eyes slowly closed. He's dead. Jiyu's entire body stiffened, as if her soul had been sucked out of her body. She sat there staring blankly, not moving at all. Ah, not bad. A voice suddenly came from a mountain not far away. Following that, more than 10 figures appeared from the surrounding mountain peaks. The person in the lead was dressed in a beautiful snow-white robe, with a jade crown on his head. His face was powdered and his lips were like a painted pill. He looked to be in his 20s and he was handsome and delicate, like an elegant young master. However, there was a hint of a king's domineering aura beneath his brows. The others were all dressed in the uniform of a warrior. They were all dressed in white, and even their hair was snow-white, almost the same color as the surrounding snow. These people were clearly the young master's subordinates. They clustered around him, faintly protecting him in the middle. Ning Xuema, who was watching the show from the sky, was moved. This is the king of Xingyue country? Should be. Shen Jiuli also glanced at the young king. I heard that the king of Xingyue country has a pearl that can guarantee immortality and eternal youth. This person is probably a few hundred years old, right? Eternal youth is true, but that pearl doesn't have the effect of making people immortal. Shen Jiuli's tone was indifferent. Ning Xuemo raised her eyebrows. She was still a little puzzled. Great God, back then you left treasures for the 3 countries. These treasures should have the ability to protect the country, right? Why did you give Xingyue country a beauty pearl? That pearl's eternal youth is just a side effect. Then what's the main effect? It allows the wearer to teleport away in an instant no matter how badly injured they are. It can even bring along 80 generals. Ning Xuema gave a thumbs up. This function is awesome. If a king could escape with his elite ministers in an instant, then there would be no such thing as the fall of a country. Because of these elite forces, even if his capital city was breached, he could still organize his forces to counterattack. This time Jun Liuye had attacked Star Moon Country. It was easy to take over the capital of Star Moon Country, but to completely eliminate the ruler of Star Moon Country was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. Ning Xuema looked at everything below and sighed. I didn't expect Jiyu to join hands with this monarch. It seems that her madness was also cured by this monarch with the bead. That should be the case. Shen Jiuli nodded slightly. I heard that the monarch of Star Moon Country is also a person of great talent and strategy. His intelligence is not much worse than Jun Liuye's. It seems that he is indeed very scheming. He is not Jun Liuye's opponent, so he actually put an effort on Jiyu. This time he even personally took action. Shen Jiuli said indifferently, he and Jun Liuye are enemies. If there is a chance to see Jun Liuye die with his own eyes, he won't let it go. That's true. Ning Xuema nodded. The monarch of Star Moon Country was defeated by Jun Liuye and must hate him to the bone. He couldn't wait to personally cut him into pieces. Now that there was such a chance, he would definitely want to see it with his own eyes. Who knows, he might even want to stab him a few more times. Chapter 2600. Ning Xuema's guess was very normal. The king of Xingyue country looked at the unconscious Jun Liuye lying on the ground. His face was filled with pride as he slowly walked towards Jun Liuye. Your Majesty, this person is dangerous. He's not dead yet. Your Majesty shouldn't go near him. His loyal subordinate hurriedly stopped him. Star Moon Country's king waved his hand and waved his subordinate away. He didn't say anything, but he sneered in his heart. This person's vital point was hit. Even if he didn't die, he would die soon. What could he do? He wanted to go up and stab him. Personally chop off his head. He still walked towards Jun Liuye. His subordinates didn't dare to stop him. Just to be safe, one of them suddenly raised his hand and shot a flying knife at Jun Liuye on the ground. He wanted him to die more thoroughly. Clang. Star Moon Country's king raised his finger and sent out a strong wind towards the flying knife. The knife turned in the air and fell to the ground. Who asked you to be a busybody? Star Moon Country's king's face was as calm as water. If you act recklessly again, behead. He wanted to take this person's life personally. Only then would there be a sense of accomplishment. His guards didn't dare to make any more moves. They looked at Jun Liuye. His vital point had been hit and blood had already dyed his clothes red. Even if he didn't die, he was on his last breath. His chest was barely moving up and down. This person had been blinded by beauty and didn't bring a single guard with him to the depths of the mountain. Now that he was so heavily injured, even if they didn't go and stab him, he wouldn't be able to live. These people finally relaxed and their gazes fell on Jiyu. She had been sitting there the whole time as if her soul had been hollowed out. She looked at the moon in the sky without moving. At this time no one cared about her. She didn't care about anyone either. Star Moon Country's king finally arrived in front of Jun Luyi and looked down at his dying face. His lips curled slightly. Jun Luyi, are you unwilling to die like this? On the ground, Jun Luyi didn't move and didn't react at all. Star Moon Country's king slowly pulled out his saber. It was a sharp blade that could cut through iron like mud. As long as it was swung out, not to mention Jun Luyi's head, even a lump of iron would be cut in half. The saber light reflected the moonlight and flashed. Jiyu, who was sitting in a daze, seemed to be disturbed by the saber light. She suddenly raised her eyes and looked over. After seeing what the monarch of Xingyu country was doing, her pupils shrank as she immediately saw through his intentions. Her body flashed and she suddenly pounced on him. What are you doing? Her petite body stood in front of Jun Luyi. He won't be able to live. You're not allowed to disgrace the corpse. She hated him and wanted to kill him, but she couldn't just stand by and watch as his corpse was dismembered. The king of Star Moon Country narrowed his eyes and said softly, Jiyu, there is only one way for me to verify a person's death, and that is to cut off his head. Be good and move aside. Jiyu's face paled. You are the ruler of a country, don't go too far. Before she could finish her sentence, she felt her waist tighten as someone hugged her from behind. Before she could react, her whole body suddenly soared into the air. From the corner of her eyes, she saw several cold lights flashing. Several streaks of blood and a scream pierced the sky. Jiyu was dumbfounded. She had already sensed that someone was hugging her. Although her back was facing that person, her nose could smell the unique fragrance of cold plum blossoms and the faint smell of blood on his body. She could even feel her back quickly becoming wet and sticky. Chapter 2601. Jun Luyi. He didn't die. In fact, he wasn't even seriously injured. Because just from the explosive power of him carrying her and swinging his sword, it was definitely not something that a seriously injured person who was on the verge of death could do. Jiyu's lifeless gaze landed on the snowy ground, where another person had fallen. He had a jade face and red lips, and his clothes were as white as snow. The jade crown on his head was gone because half of his head was missing. The Star Moon Country's monarch was originally going to cut off someone else's head, but now his head had been cut off. Everything happened too quickly, too suddenly, and too unexpectedly. The elite subordinates didn't even have time to rescue him, and they could only watch helplessly as half of the monarch's head was cut off. Your Majesty! Your Majesty! These people cried out in shock and went mad with anger. With a shout, they moved together, wanting to pounce on Jun Luyi and fight him to the death. The snowy ground under their feet suddenly softened, and dozens of figures rushed out from the snow like ghosts. The figures flickered continuously, and in the blink of an eye, the elites were trapped in the middle. Jiyu widened her eyes and looked at the people who suddenly appeared. They were dressed in the attire of the Huiwei country's secret guards, and there were a few familiar faces among them. They were all elite assassins from the Dark Shadow Tower. Needless to say, these were Jun Luyi's men. They were already prepared, and he had already made arrangements. The assassins from the Dark Shadow Tower were all top-notch experts. The moment they appeared, they killed a few of the Star Moon Country's guards nearby, and a few more corpses appeared on the ground. These people surrounded the remaining 10 people in the middle and pointed their swords at them, forcing them to surrender. The Star Moon Country's monarch was already dead, and these people were like a group of dragons without a leader. Now that they were surrounded, logically speaking, they should surrender and seek a way out. However, they didn't expect these people to be so loyal, and had no intention of surrendering at this time. One of them shouted loudly, "If the monarch dies, the subjects should also die. Brothers, we'd rather die for our country than betray His Majesty." That's right. Let's fight it out with them. Killing one is enough, and killing two is a profit. Yes, we'd rather die than be subjects of a fallen country. Jun Luyi's men did not expect these people to be so courageous. The leader looked at Jun Luyi and said, "Your Majesty." Jun Luyi stood there and glanced at those people. He only said a few words, "Let them be." He took a step back and used his sleeve to cover Jiyu's eyes. He said softly, "Don't look." The massacre had scared her out of her wits, and he didn't want her to experience the same thing again. Jiyu didn't resist in his arms. She seemed to have accepted her fate, but it also seemed that she hadn't completely reacted. His sleeves covered her eyes so she couldn't see the bloody scene. However, he could hear the sound of swords piercing into flesh, as well as the muffled groans of people on the verge of death. "Your Majesty, let this humble servant take a look at your injuries." Two shadow guards had been waiting by Jun Luye's side for a long time, anxiously wanting to examine his injuries. Not only were these two people skilled in martial arts, they were also experts in treating all kinds of internal and external injuries. They also served as imperial physicians in the army. Although Jun Luye's sword strike looked dangerous, he had been prepared beforehand. He had used his Shenqi to slightly adjust the vital organs in his body. Therefore the sword strike had only left a flesh wound. Not even a single bone had been damaged. However, he was still made of flesh and blood. Even if it was only a flesh wound, it was still very painful. Moreover, he had lost so much blood. Chapter 26:02. Even with his strong body, his forehead was covered in cold sweat. His arms were weak and he could barely hold on to Jiyu. But he did not want to let go. Your Majesty, the Empress is not injured. Why don't you put her down first? Your Majesty's injury must be treated in time. Although the two shadow guards spoke politely, their eyes were fixed on Jiyu, guarding against her stabbing the Lord again. After all, her attack just now was ruthless and ruthless. She did not hold back at all. If not for the Lord's peerless martial arts and the ability to change his acupoints without batting an eyelid, that stab would have taken the Lord's life. At that time they were watching from underground and were so shocked that they almost jumped out. If not for the Lord's strict orders to not act rashly unless it was a critical moment, they would have jumped out at that time. His Majesty is truly taking risks. It's too thrilling. An empress who assassinates her husband should be punished with 9 familial extermination. Jun Luye did not care. He had already sealed his own acupoints to stop the bleeding. His eyes swept over the two shadow guards. I am fine. Don't worry about me. Go help them. Your Majesty. Your Majesty. The two shadow guards were unwilling to give up. This is a military order. Jun Luye's voice turned cold. The two shadow guards had no choice but to join the battle. Before they left, they were still worried. Your Majesty, please be careful. Two sharp gazes swept over Jiyu. It goes without saying who should be careful. Jun Luye ignored them. He hugged Jiyu and took a step back. Sitting on a large rock, he watched the battle. The battle was nearing its end. Although Xingyue's guards were top experts, they were no match for the enemy. Moreover, the experts here were all abnormal and not easy to deal with. One by one, people fell down. The smell of blood on the peak became thicker and thicker. Jun Luye let out a sigh of relief and the corners of his lips curled up. Killing Xingyue's emperor was equivalent to destroying Xingyue. Breaking into the city was just around the corner. The day of victory and return to the city was not far away. Clap, clap. Jiyu in his arms suddenly clapped twice. Your Majesty really has a good plan. Jun Luye choked and looked down at her. Jiyu's face was as white as snow, but her small mouth was curled into a smile. Your Majesty, your goal has been achieved, so there's no need for this affectionate play anymore, right? Her tone was calm, but her words were as sharp as a knife. Jun Luye's body stiffened as if someone had poured a bucket of cold water over him. Jiyu took the opportunity to roll out of his embrace and landed on the ground. His movements had also alarmed the few shadow guards who had been eyeing him covetously. As soon as Jiyu moved, 2 shadow guards rushed over and said, "Don't hurt His Majesty." One of the guards was impatient and made the first move, slashing his saber towards Jiyu. The princess of a fallen country was a scourge. He would get rid of her for His Majesty. Clang. After an ear-piercing sound of metal clashing, the saber in the guard's hand was sent flying, almost cutting his own neck. He was so shocked that he took 2 steps back. Your Majesty. This woman cannot be allowed to live. Jun Luye's face was also pale from the shock. He sheathed his sword and coldly said, "You dare to assassinate the Empress? Are you seeking death?" Your Majesty, this woman is the princess of a fallen country. If she stays by Your Majesty's side, she must have other intentions. We must guard against her. The guard threw caution to the wind and said what most of the other guards were thinking. The other guards secretly nodded. Chapter 26:03. It was fine when this woman was crazy, at least she didn't have any self-awareness and wouldn't harm His Majesty. But now that she's back to normal and is clearly here for revenge, how can they be at ease letting such a woman stay by His Majesty's side? If it weren't for Jun Luye's prestige, these people would have tried to persuade him. Jun Luye's face darkened. How can you interfere in the Empress' affairs? If you say another word, I'll punish you according to military law. His body has a terrifying aura. Although these people are unwilling, they don't dare to say another word. They all secretly stare at Jiyu, their eyes alert. Jiyu has already stood up and her gaze swept over the crowd. The battle is already over. Corpses are scattered all over the ground and blood has dyed most of the ice peak red. It's a ghastly sight. Most of these corpses are from Star Moon Country. They originally came to ambush Jun Luyi, but they didn't expect to be ambushed by him and be completely wiped out. Jun Luyi has won another big battle, right? He used the trick of injuring himself to gain the enemy's confidence and killed the enemy's emperor, obtaining a crucial victory. And she planned for several days, endured for several days, but she didn't think that all her schemes would be transparent in his eyes. She used up all her tricks, but in the end, the one who helped him was still him. This person is worthy of being the invincible Azura war god. His use of military tactics has reached perfection. I'm not his opponent at all. Useless. I'm really useless. My life is like a joke that I'm only being used by others. Her gaze falls on Jun Luyi. His blue robe is mottled with blood, but his spirit is very good. His eyes are shining, his posture is tall and proud, and he looks like he has a card up his sleeve. His iron-blooded guards surrounded him. They had just killed the other party's king, so they were feeling very refreshed. Jiyu suddenly smiles and cups her hands towards Jun Luyi. Your Majesty, congratulations, you've won again. He's too smart. No matter when, he's always the winner. She's not his opponent, no matter how hard she tries. She will never win against him again in this life, and she doesn't want to win. Jiyu, what's there to talk about winning or losing between us? We never wanted to win against you. This time we only wanted to calm you down and beat you at your own game. Jun Luyi took a step forward and spoke. He didn't know why, but her smile made his heart sink as if something was leaving him. He reached out to pull her. Jiyu, let's go back. I will explain everything to you. He would tell her about her parents, but not now. That matter was too confidential. It was best not to speak of it in front of so many subordinates, lest it spread back to the court and cause unnecessary disputes. She had regained her sanity, which was great. He would explain everything to her when he got back, and if necessary he would take her to see her parents. Jiyu took a step back, avoiding him as if he was a snake or a scorpion. Her face became paler and paler. She smiled and shook her head. There's nothing to explain. The enmity of the destruction of his country and the enmity of his parents was there. He had clearly been used time and time again. What else was there to explain? From the beginning to the end, she was just a pitiful worm who was being used by others. Fortunately, her useless life was about to come to an end, so she wasn't afraid of being used by him again. Her smile was too old, her smile was too despairing. That smile could even be called empty, making Jun Luyi's heart feel like it was hit by something. Chapter 2604. He had never seen Jiyu like this before. Even when she found out that he had used her to destroy Jiyu, she did not despair to this extent. Jiyu, you have a lot of misunderstandings about me. Come back with me and I will slowly explain everything to you. He suddenly took a step forward and ignored her attempts to avoid him. He grabbed her hand and pulled her into his embrace, hugging her tightly as if this was the only way for him to feel a sense of reality. Jiyu did not move an inch and let him hug her. Her body was unusually cold, and even if he hugged her like this, he could not warm her up at all. Your Majesty, her face doesn't look right. A shadow guard who knew medicine suddenly shouted. Jun Luyi stiffened and loosened his grip on her body slightly. He looked at her face and his heart suddenly sank. Her face was so pale that there was no trace of blood, but now there was a faint layer of pink on her cheeks like peach blossoms. Her lips were also a faint shade of pink, glistening like water. Her complexion was very good and her entire body looked soft and tender, as if she was still that little princess who did not know the dangers of the world, walking in the spring with flowers blooming. Her body was clearly as cold as snow, so it was normal for her face to be pale, but now, what did she do? Jun Luyi's fingers trembled as he held her arms tightly and stared into her eyes. Jiyu, what did you eat? When he was cuddling with her earlier, he had also secretly checked her body. Other than the dagger, she did not have any dangerous items on her. When he kissed her, he had even used his tongue to sweep her teeth. There were no drugs hidden in her teeth like those assassins. Logically speaking, she should not have had any opportunity to take any drugs. But her current appearance was extremely abnormal, as if she had been poisoned. Impossible. She could not have taken any drugs. She had no chance. Perhaps there was another reason. His palm quickly pressed against her back and his inner energy quickly flowed through her body, trying to find out what was wrong with her body. There was indeed something wrong with her body. The blood in her body was circulating twice as fast as usual, and when his inner energy rushed in, it seemed to have triggered some kind of mechanism, causing her blood to circulate even faster. Even faster. Her body trembled slightly and she spat out a mouthful of blood with a cry. Jun Lioye's expression changed as he hurriedly withdrew his palm and hugged her limp body, his fingers trembling slightly. Damn it, she had taken poison. He must have taken poison. She wanted to die. She actually wanted to die. She had tried so hard to live, but now she was seeking death. Furthermore, it caught him off guard. Don't worry. His blood was the antidote to hundreds of poisons. He would not allow her to die. Without his permission she would not die. He touched her short sword and cut his palm in front of everyone's shocked cries. Blood gushed out and he brought his palm close to her lips. He forced open her teeth and poured the blood into her mouth. She wanted to resist, but her body was too weak to break free from his grip on her chin. She coughed and coughed up more than half of the blood that she had poured into her mouth. Don't cough. Drink it. Jiyu, drink it. Jun Lioye leaned over and kissed her on the lips, forcing her to swallow the blood. This was a kiss without any demands. Her lips were cold and soft while his trembling lips were strong. The taste of blood spread in their mouths. Jun Lioye forced her to drink 2 mouthfuls of blood. Chapter 2605. Afraid that it wasn't enough, he raised his sword to cut again as the blood flow from the wound on his palm gradually decreased. Your Majesty, that's enough. 1 drop of your blood can cure 100 poisons, there's no need for so much. A shadow guard rushed over and grabbed the sword with all his might. Yes, Your Majesty. Your blood is hot and her body is weak. Drinking too much will make her look bad. Another shadow guard also rushed over. Jun Lioye stopped cutting his hand and waved away the 2 shadow guards. He held Jiyu in his arms and stared at her beautiful face. Once the poison was cured, her complexion would return to normal. He would rather see her pale than see her as beautiful and lively as she was now. It was like the final radiance of the setting sun. Then he was disappointed. Jiyu's face turned even redder, as if peach blossoms had bloomed on her cheeks. Her lips were still stained with his blood. Her red lips were full, giving her a soul-stirring beauty. She didn't look at him from beginning to end. Her eyes stared blankly at the moon in the sky as her breathing gradually weakened. The poison wasn't cured. His blood wasn't useful either. His gaze was like a knife as he looked at one of the shadow guards. Can you tell what kind of poison she was poisoned with? This shadow guard was an expert from a family that specialized in poisons. His poison skills were superb and his detoxification skills were naturally not to be underestimated. He was Jun Lioye's right-hand man and also his personal doctor. The shadow guard's face was pale. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something but didn't dare. But Jun Lioye was impatient. Your Majesty, looking at her symptoms, it seems to be the legendary peach blossom tragedy. The shadow guard spoke with difficulty. Peach blossom tragedy? Jun Lioye's heart seemed to sink to the bottom of the sea. After all, he had been on the battlefield for many years and had heard of this peach blossom tragedy. It was a legendary poison that was created using the peach blossom miasma and other poisons. Once the poison flared up, the victim's face would become like a peach blossom and their body would gradually lose strength. In the end, they would die of exhaustion. Jun Lioye had only heard of this poison occasionally and had never seen it before. How can this poison be cured? Jun Lioye gritted his teeth. The shadow guard shook his head with a face full of shame. This subordinate has only heard of the symptoms of this poison. It said that there's no antidote. His voice became softer. Jun Lioye's head exploded. His body swayed slightly as his vision turned black. No antidote. In the end, he's still going to lose her? No way. He had clearly taken care of everything and was in control of everything. She shouldn't have died. He can't die. He didn't believe it. He did not believe that there was no cure. How did she get this strange poison? Who gave it to her? Perhaps the person who gave her this poison had a way to detoxify it. He had to find out who had poisoned him. Jun Lioye seemed to have finally grasped onto a life-saving straw as he held Jiyu's arm tightly. Jiyu, tell me who gave you this poison. We have to get the antidote from him. I will save you. Jiyu still didn't look at him. She didn't even blink. Obviously, she had no desire to live and was waiting for death. Jun Lioye held her body tightly and suppressed the panic in his heart. He tried his best to remain calm and forced her to look into his eyes. Jiyu, you've misunderstood me. I didn't kill your parents. The one I killed was a substitute. Your parents are still alive and well. Don't you want to see them? If you live on, I'll take you to see them when we return. Jiyu's eyes finally slowly turned and landed on his face. Her eyes flashed with ridicule. Her little mouth opened and closed a few times before she softly spat out 3 words. I don't believe it. Chapter 2606. She would never believe a single word of his ever again. It's true. Jiyu, as long as you survive, you'll be able to see them. I promise you. I swear. Jiyu slowly closed her eyes. At this point, she no longer believed in anyone, much less him. The poison had already taken effect. All the meridians in her body felt like they were burning. Her forehead was dripping with sweat, but there was a smile of relief on her lips. It was finally going to end. She was tired. She was really tired. Since she couldn't take revenge, she wouldn't do it. She just wanted to be free. Her breathing began to quicken. The peach blossom on her face became more vibrant, and a faint pink color filled her eyes. Jun Lioye panicked. His face was pale as he hugged her. This was the first time he was at a loss. Your Majesty, Her Highness. She once worked with people from Xingyue country. Could this poison have been given to her by the king of Xingyue country? One of the guards was still very meticulous. He voiced his guess. Search. Search their bodies. Don't let a single piece of cloth go. Jun Lioye was practically shouting. He was no longer as calm as before. All the corpses were searched from head to toe. A pile of medicine bottles and sachets were found. 2 shadow guards with high medical skills quickly checked the medicine. However, they were quickly disappointed. The medicine was common medicine like golden sore medicine. There wasn't any medicine that could cure the peach blossom sorrow. Jiyu's body in his arms was getting colder and colder. Jun Lioye hugged her like he was hugging a lump of ice. He staggered up with her in his arms. He wanted to carry her down the mountain. He wanted to bring her to the miracle doctor. He wanted to save her. Your Majesty, the poison person can't move on their own. You can't use your energy to expel the poison. Otherwise the poison will spread even faster. The guard reminded him. Jun Lioye suddenly looked up. His eyes were about to spit fire. Then what do we do? Was he supposed to watch her die? Your Majesty, I heard that if the poison person has a strong desire to live, then with a set of detoxification treatment, they can have a chance of survival. The guard didn't dare to be slow. Without waiting for Jun Lioye to ask, he quickly explained the steps of the treatment. Jun Lioye acted as if he had found a treasure. He immediately pressed his palm on a certain meridian on Jiyu's back and sent his chi in, wanting to save her life. To use this method, Jiyu must use her own internal energy. Jun Lioye's true energy entered her heart meridian, trying to forcefully stimulate the true energy in her body, but it was futile. Jiyu, cooperate with me. Be good and listen to me. You can't die. Jiyu, be good. Cooperate with me and let me expel the poison from your body. As long as you survive, I will restore Jiyu Kingdom and let your father ascend the throne. Nothing will change. Jun Lioye's voice was hoarse and his eyes were bloodshot as he desperately made a wish to her. 1,000 deaths. Jiyu's small mouth opened, suddenly muttering 2 words. I'm here, Jiyu, I'm here. Pull yourself together. Even though it was Jun Lioye's first time using such a treatment method, he used his inner energy perfectly. He condensed it into a line and moved it around Jiyu's body, trying his best to get her to cooperate. Jiyu slightly opened her eyes and fixed her gaze on Jun Lioye's face. She seemed to be in a dazed and empty state. No, you're not 1,000 deaths. He's already dead. In my heart, he's already dead. Jun Lioye's fingers trembled slightly. His heart felt like it was being twisted by a knife. Jiyu, I know you hate me. When you're better, I'll let you kill me, okay? Give me one more chance. Jiyu, give me one more chance. Chapter 2607. Jiyu's eyelashes fluttered, her eyes empty. No, I don't hate you. I only hate myself. Hate herself for being so foolish, hate herself for loving the wrong person. Hate herself for not being able to let go even though she knew the other party was an enemy. Previously she was indeed crazy. Her days were chaotic and she could not hear anything that others said to her. Until the godly doctor from Xingyue country treated her for 4 days. Although her insanity was not completely cured because the treatment was not completed, she could still sense little bits and pieces of the outside world. Occasionally she could even hear the voices of the outside world. After Jun Lioye left, she didn't know when, but her usually muddled mind suddenly cleared up a little. Fragments of the past began to float in her mind. Although she couldn't piece them together, she knew that she was the princess of Gu country and had been kidnapped here. She even remembered that she had a fiancé that she liked. Although she could not remember what he looked like, she remembered that he had once said that he wanted to marry her. She did not want to stay in the palace, did not want to be the empress. She was very afraid and wanted to go home. But she also knew that those people would not let her go. She began to pay attention to the layout of the palace and slowly she could remember most of it. The people who served her in the palace were on guard against external enemies. They did not guard against the crazy her at all, so she escaped easily. When she came outside, she bumped into the king of Star Moon country in disguise, or perhaps he had been waiting there all along. The king restrained her and placed a pearl between her eyebrows for an hour. While she felt the coolness of the pearl, she finally regained all her consciousness and memories. Her heart fell into an icy hell. Her parents died tragically in front of her, and the scene of blood spurting out seemed like yesterday. She knew that Jun Lioye had risked universal condemnation to make her the empress, and she also knew that he was good to her. But these good things could not offset the blood that had been spilled. The hatred of killing her parents was irreconcilable. She must take revenge. So she and the king of Star Moon country hit it off and made this plan. She had come to this point and no longer had any thoughts of living. She asked the king of Star Moon country for poison, preparing to take the poison and commit suicide after she got it, ending all troubles. The king of Star Moon nation gave her a peach blossom sorrow and told her that this medicine had a special characteristic. She could take it a day in advance. After taking it, as long as she did not use any special method to activate it, the poison would not act up. It could even be expelled using a special method. However, once the poison was activated, it would take effect and the person would die within an hour. At that time, the king of Star Moon country said with a smile that he would give her a chance to change her mind. Not only did he teach her how to make the poison flare up, he also taught her how to expel the poison from her body before it flared up. Jiyu had taken the poison a day earlier. She was determined to kill Jun Luyi for revenge. In order to cover up her lie, she purposely pretended to have amnesia. This was the only way Jun Lioye would not be on guard against her and would not be suspicious of her deliberate approach. Her plan was very good, and her acting was also not bad. It could be said that she had performed exceptionally. She thought that her heart was already as hard as iron, and that she would not be moved by anything anymore. But when she was really with him, the surprise he had when he saw her and the unguarded kindness he had shown her had struck her heart. She couldn't bear to do it. She had several chances to plot against him, but she could not bear to let them go. This time she finally made her move. Chapter 2608. For the last time she finally made her move. The moment she saw him slowly fall, her heart seemed to collapse along with him. The pain was bone-piercing. It was also painful and empty. She had finally killed him. She had finally avenged her parents, but she did not feel the slightest bit of joy. All she felt was pain. It was an overwhelming pain that almost engulfed her entire being. She sat on the ground and activated the death of Peach Blossom in her body. Since they could not be together in life, then she would let them die together. By killing him, she would not let down her parents who had died tragically. By committing suicide, she would not let down her love, and she would not let him down. She thought that this was the end between them, but she did not think that this was also his plan. He had long seen through her disguise. In order to lure out the Star Moon country's ruler, he had pretended to be polite and did not hesitate to use the trick of injuring himself to gain her confidence. This move of his was not just a little bit beautiful. It was his style. She had no choice but to admit defeat. Using schemes in front of him was no different from showing off in front of a master. In his eyes she was probably just a clown who thought too highly of herself. She was a failure, a complete and utter failure. As matters stood, she did not hate him. She really did not hate him. She only hated her own stupidity. Fortunately, this sad life of hers was about to end. She no longer needed to live such a tiring and complicated life. Jun Luyi was still shouting something in her ear, but she could not hear it clearly. She could only faintly feel that his voice was a little sharp and hoarse, causing her eardrums to hurt from the vibrations. She could even feel the warmth of his chest. It was so thick and so warm. She could also feel the hot tears dripping onto her face and the corner of her lips. It was salty and astringent. She vaguely thought that there were times when he lost his composure like this. He would also shout and speak so loudly. Perhaps he still had a little bit of love for her. He wasn't completely heartless towards her, was he? However, none of this was important to her. Her eyes began to blur and her head began to feel dizzy. It was as if she saw the peach blossoms bloom and wither, wither and bloom again. In the midst of the blossoming peach blossoms, she saw her lover in a purple robe slowly walking over. He smiled at her and called her little moon, Chen Shang. Her little mouth muttered a few words. Her empty eyes slightly lit up as she struggled to reach her hand out to him. Unable to reverse the situation, Jun Liuye could only watch as her breathing grew weaker and weaker. His blood-stained hand gripped her cold one tightly, as if he could slow her down by doing so. "Jiyu, hang in there, don't die," he roared at the top of his lungs. His voice, which had almost changed its pitch, reverberated through the snowy peak, causing the snow to begin to slide down. However, Jiyu could no longer hear it. She had completely fallen into an illusion. "Chen Shang, take me away? You said you would marry me. I've been waiting for you this entire time. I even personally prepared the wedding dress." She spat out a few more words before slowly closing her eyes. A single tear finally fell from the corner of her eye. In the end, she didn't have the chance to wear the wedding dress that she had prepared herself. The girl's colorful dream was shattered in the cruel reality. So this was the cause of Jiyu's death. So this was how she died. Ning Xuema watched all of this from the sky. She watched as the beautiful girl took her last breath in Jun Liuye's arms. Her eyes never opened again. Although she had long known that Jiyu would die, seeing it happen with her own eyes, her heart still felt heavy as if it was filled with lead. Shenjuli held her hand and was about to say something when a gust of wind suddenly blew in the sky. The world turned gray as if the sky was about to collapse. "What's going on?" Ning Xuemo raised her head. "Let's go out." Shenjuli decisively made his move, setting up a barrier around him and Ning Xuemo. Chapter 2609. As soon as the enchantment was set up, the world around them began to collapse. The mountains were toppling, the sky was turning upside down, and the seawater that came out of nowhere crashed towards Ning Xuema and the others. Ning Xuema only felt her vision blur, and her body suddenly felt heavy. She felt as if she was stepping on solid ground. She opened her eyes and gently exhaled. She was out of the dream. She was still in the ice cave. Shenjuli stood beside her, holding her hand. "Are you okay?" He quickly used his telekinesis to check her body. After confirming that she was indeed fine, he let go of her hand and hugged her waist instead. Ning Xuema's heart warmed. The great god was really considerate. The great god was the one who took the initiative to enter her memories. Ning Xuema was also afraid that he would be injured, so she carefully looked at him. Seeing that he was fine, she was relieved. When she turned around, she saw that Jun Liuye's face was extremely pale. He was staring at the ice coffin in a daze, and a line of blood slowly flowed down from the corner of his mouth. "He is." Ning Xuema stepped forward. The memory was too tragic. It shook his heart, so he vomited blood. Shenjuli explained briefly. Their conversation woke Jun Liuye from his daze. He immediately looked at them. "The two of you?" Ning Xuema waved her hand. "We read your memories and know the ins and outs of the matter. Let me ask you, how are Jiyu's parents now?" Jun Liuye closed his eyes and sighed. "I originally arranged for them to live in seclusion in a beautiful place. I wanted to let them reunite after Jiyu recovered, but I didn't expect that Jiyu. When news of Jiyu's death reached them, they couldn't take it and fell ill. They both passed away a year ago." Ning Xuema was speechless. The life and death of Jiyu's parents was the key to whether Jiyu could continue living in this world. Now that even they were dead, even if the great god performed a miracle and revived Jiyu, would she be able to live happily? "Grand Tutor, now that you know the truth, can you revive her?" Jun Liuye stared at Shenjuli as if he was his last hope. Shenjuli looked at the ice coffin and didn't answer his question. Instead he asked, "After she died, who told you that there was hope for her to come back to life? Who told you to preserve her body this way?" There were no immortal cultivators in this world. After people died, they were either buried or simply cremated. No one had ever thought of resurrecting a dead person. Naturally, no one would think of preserving the corpse. Not only had Jun Liuye preserved it, he had preserved it exceptionally well. Even this method of preserving corpses should not exist in this world. Jun Liuye was taken aback by Shenjuli's question. After a while he replied, "This was something we came up with. We feel that she can be revived, but we can't enter the door. We can only preserve her body like this for now." Shenjuli looked at him with a complicated gaze. It was as if something he had suspected for a long time had been confirmed. He silently counted with his fingers in his sleeves and didn't say anything. Jun Liuya looked at him carefully and asked, Grand Tutor, do you have a way? Shinjuli slowly shook his head and finally spat out 2 words. No. Jun Liuya staggered, his face turning even paler. He blurted out, how can there not be? Doesn't Grand Tutor have the ability to bring people back to life? Even if a person's soul is scattered, Grand Tutor can still bring them back to life. Why is there no way now? Jiyu, she's only dead, her soul isn't scattered. Chapter 26:10. This Lord only said that I might be able to bring someone back to life. Who told you that this Lord can also bring someone back to life even if their soul is scattered? Shinjiulu questioned. Jun Luyi, this? Indeed, no one had told him this before, but he was certain of it in his subconscious and was extremely sure of it. It was as if he had known Shinjuli from the start. Just like the method to preserve Jiyu's body, he had learned it himself. Imperial Tutor's meaning? Could it be that you also have no other way? Jun Luye's voice trembled slightly, but he forced himself to calm down. Imperial Tutor is omnipotent. Even deities can be brought back to life, let alone a mortal. She only died from poison, her soul did not disappear. There must be a way to save her, right? Shinjuli's gaze turned sharp. Do you know what oath Princess Jiyu made to Ziyu in her heart when she pledged her life to you in Huayu restaurant? What oath? I believed that Qian Shang loved me, so I swore in the name of Jiyu country's princess that I would be with him forever. If I went against it, my body and soul would disappear. Shinjuli calmly repeated Jiyu's oath. Jun Luyi staggered a step. He never thought that Jiyu would make such an oath under such circumstances. At that time he only treated her as an innocent child and did not truly love her, so? Cold sweat dripped down Jun Luye's forehead. His voice trembled slightly as he refused to believe this fact. You went against your oath, she also went against her oath, so her body and soul disappeared. Her soul is no longer here. Shinjuli coldly stated the truth. How could she be revived without her soul? Even the omnipotent Shinjuli could not do anything about it. Jiyu was really dead and could not be revived. That girl had completely disappeared from this world. No matter what he did, she would never come back. From generation to generation, forever and ever. Even if he reincarnated, he would never meet her again. When Shinjuli announced this result, Jun Liuya felt as if he had been ruthlessly pierced by something. His pale face was devoid of blood and his eyes were blank. He staggered a few steps and slowly he sat down. Snowy peaks stood in great numbers and ice towers were everywhere. The sky was filled with ice and snow, and the weather seemed to be even colder. Ning Xuema and Shinjuli walked side by side on the snowy road down the mountain. Great God, is Jiyu really hopeless? Ning Xuema turned her head to look at the ice peak that was gradually disappearing into the distance. She didn't know what to feel in her heart. She thought that she could help this pair be together, but who would have thought? She is no longer in this world, including her soul, Shinjuli answered briefly. What do you mean? Was her soul really gone? Logically speaking, she only died from consuming poison. That kind of poison can at most take a person's life, but it can't disperse a person's soul, right? His soul didn't scatter but disappeared. Poison doesn't scatter the soul but vows to scatter the soul. Shinjuli spoke like an old monk, full of Buddhist wisdom. Ning Xuema's understanding of Buddhism was not high, so she was too lazy to think about it. She only knew that Princess Jiyu would never come back. Great God, you said that Jiyu had completely disappeared. Then how can you still read her memories? I thought that only the soul could. That is only an obsession attached to her body, not a soul. Then what about Jun Liuya? Ning Xuema turned her head to look at the ice peak. When she and the Great God came out, Jun Liuya had been sitting there in a daze, without any intention of following them. Chapter 26:11. Ning Xuema knew that he had suffered a great blow and needed some time to calm down. There are gains and losses. You can't have your cake and eat it too. Shinjuli's voice was faint, but his words hit the nail on the head. Ning Xuema nodded slightly and sighed. Jun Liuya was a man of great talent and strategy. Perhaps in his heart, he had always prioritized the country. He had indeed won the world, but he had also completely lost her. Love did not hold much weight in an emperor's heart. Perhaps he would be able to walk out of it soon. It was just like what she had read in a modern romance novel. Ruling over a vast country, enjoying endless loneliness. He had chosen this path himself, so he could only continue walking down it himself. Speaking of which, great God, I keep feeling that Jun Liuye is somewhat familiar, as if I've seen him somewhere before. But I can swear that this is the first time I've seen him. Perhaps, this isn't the first time you've seen him. Perhaps you've interacted with him before. Shen Jiuli raised a hand to ruffle her hair. This world isn't that big. The great God had begun to meditate again. Ning Xuema was too lazy to waste her time thinking. She was now worried about another problem. Great God, if this is your second task, then does this mean that we've failed? Shen Jiuli pondered for a moment. That's hard to say. He turned to look at the mountain peak in the distance. This depends on the Emperor's choice. Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat. Her eyes sparkled. You're saying that they still have hope? Shen Jiuli smiled but did not answer. Ning Xuema also knew that it was inconvenient for the great God to say too much when it came to matters of the heavens. She did not press him any further. She was about to say something when she suddenly sensed something and raised her head. Dark clouds gathered in the sky. The inky black clouds rolled in like a tide, covering the entire sky in the blink of an eye. The sky was dark as if it was the end of the world. Crack. A golden bolt of lightning struck down from the sky, cutting a mountain peak in the distance. With a loud bang, half of the mountain collapsed. What was going on? Lightning flashed and thunder rumbled in a world of ice and snow. Could it be that there were spirits or monsters in the mountains that were about to undergo a heavenly tribulation? Streak after streak of lightning struck down like a dancing golden snake. Endless rumbling sounds could be heard as all of the mountain peaks suffered the calamity and collapsed along with the lightning. Mountains crumbled and the earth cracked. The mountain was about to collapse. Wasn't the heavenly lightning very accurate when a Fae transcended its tribulation? If he only used his strength on the tribulation transcendence Fae, he would not harm the surrounding flowers and plants. But now, it was as if the entire mountain was undergoing a tribulation. Could it be that this snow mountain had become a spirit? It can't be. With the Almighty by her side and Ning Xuema's high level of kung fu, even if the sky collapsed, she wouldn't be hurt. She suddenly turned around and ran back. Shen Jiuli grabbed her and asked, "Where are you going?" Jun Liuye is still in that cave. With the mountains collapsing and the earth cracking, he better not be buried inside. Although his attributes are a bit trash, he is still a wise emperor. We still have to save him. Let's do a good deed today. Ning Xuema had just said this when she suddenly froze. A golden bolt of lightning as thick as a pot lid swayed down from the sky and struck the tallest mountain peak. The loud sound of thunder shook the entire world. After the lightning passed, the mountain peak disappeared. No, it was instantly flattened. Such a tall mountain peak was actually flattened by a bolt of lightning. Chapter 26:12. And the ice cave where Jiyu's body was hidden was on top of the mountain. Great God, go save him. Ning Xuema pulled Shen Jiuli and ran. Logically speaking, the people in the cave shouldn't have been able to survive after the landslide, but Jun Liuye was not an ordinary person. He was the male lead here, not to mention that his martial arts were abnormally high. That person, aside from not knowing any spells, was at the peak of perfection in all other aspects. He clearly surpassed the settings of an ordinary person in this world. Just like the great God, he belonged to an abnormal species. How could such a person die in this landslide? Shen Jiuli pulled Ning Xuema into his arms and smiled. You care about him that much? Ning Xuema pressed her hand on his shoulder. Great God, I'll have to trouble you to put away your vinegar bottle first. Saving people is more important. Shen Jiuli didn't move and continued to tease her. Xuema, you're the devil lord, yet you're even more merciful than a deity. Did I train you? Train your ass. Ning Xuema said, Great God, he's the emperor of this continent. He can be considered the number one person. He followed you and me up the mountain. At that time his subjects all saw it. If he dies here, you and I won't have a good time when we go down. They'll treat us like jinx and beat us up. You don't want to live like a street rat, right? Be good and listen to me. Let's go save him first. At this time he might be lying in a crack in a rock waiting for you to save him. She pulled his arm and pulled him forward. She felt that walking was too slow, so she simply pulled him and flew. She flew into the air like a gust of wind. Suddenly she seemed to realize something and suddenly stopped her cloud steps. The result of this sudden stop was that Shen Jiuli, who was pulled by her, directly crashed into her body. If he didn't quickly catch her, she would have been sent flying in a parabola. What's wrong? Shen Jiuli helped her up and then took a step back. He crossed his arms and looked at her. I can actually fly. My psychokinesis has been restored. Ning Xuema was in disbelief. She even moved her arms and legs. Congratulations. Shen Jiuli congratulated her without much sincerity. Ning Xuema was still confused, but now was not the time to think about these things. She was still thinking about saving people. She pulled Shen Jiuli's hand and said, "Guru, don't talk nonsense here. Let's get the emperor out first." Shen Jiuli pointed down with his chin. "Take a look. Is there any other way?" Ning Xuema looked down and her head buzzed. In just a few moments, the snowy mountain that had been filled with mountains had completely disappeared. Below it was a vast expanse of white snow, and not a single trace of its former appearance could be seen. This is an entire mountain. It actually disappeared just like that without leaving any trace behind. It was too strange. Under such circumstances, trying to find someone who was originally hiding in the cave was undoubtedly like looking for a needle in a haystack. Moreover, that person was most likely not there anymore. Ning Xuema decisively grabbed the guru's arm. "Guru, it looks like you'll have to revive Jun Luyi. Fortunately, he was crushed to death by the mountain, so his soul didn't scatter. Help him summon a soul and create a body." She said it as if he could create a person out of mud. Shen Jiuli chuckled. His soul should also be gone. The guru's expression actually looked a bit happy. Ning Xuema raised her eyebrows and looked at him. "Guru, was this what you expected?" Chapter 26:13. Shen Jiuli put an arm on her shoulder and said lazily, "It seems that this is his choice. That's good. Everything is back on track." Ning Xuema crossed her arms and waited for him to explain. Master. Master." Two figures, one red and one blue, came from afar and flew to the two of them in the blink of an eye. It was Kirin and Little Phoenix. The two beasts looked flustered. Little Phoenix asked a series of questions. "Master, are you okay? We heard the commotion from the capital. Oh my God. Why did the mountain collapse?" "That's right. The commoners in the capital are also in a state of panic. An army is rushing over here," the little Qilin added. Ning Xuema and the rest were in midair. Naturally they could see further. Ning Xuema shaded her eyes with her hand and looked far away. She could faintly see an army rushing over. When Ning Xuema and the rest followed Jun Liuya up the mountain, there was an army waiting for them at the foot of the mountain. It was this army that was rushing in their direction. It was even led by a few of Jun Liuya's trusted subordinates. "Great God, if they find out that their emperor is gone, how will they see us? What should we do now?" Ning Xuema rubbed her eyebrows. She did not want to be a jinx anymore. Shen Jiuli pondered for a moment, then slowly came up with a bad idea. "Let's run." "Ah. The great god could run away too?" Shen Jiuli did not wait for her to say anything else. He hugged her and jumped onto Kirin's back. "Let's go." Although there was an 80% chance that they would suffer if they stayed, it was not like the great god to run away. Ning Xuema felt that there was something wrong with the great god's style. But soon she felt that the great god's style had returned to normal. This was because the great god's escape was incomparably cool. He actually commanded Kirin to fly directly toward the army. Kirin and Little Phoenix were both auspicious beasts. Previously, when they had lost their telekinesis and could only fly, they had attracted the attention of the people of this world. Now they had also recovered their telekinesis. Kirin's entire body was wrapped in a misty blue light, which looked like clouds and mist. Little Phoenix was wrapped in the bright and beautiful flames. When the two beasts flew side by side, there were simply thousands of rays of multicolored light, and propitious vapors were rising. Naturally, this caused the people below to exclaim in surprise. Amidst the exclamations of the people below, Shen Jiuli and Ning Xuema appeared in the air. Their bodies seemed to be shrouded in auspicious light as they stood in the air like clouds and mist. Even if they didn't say anything, they still caused the people below to kneel down. Immortal. God. Lord Imperial Preceptor is an immortal. Where is His Majesty? His Majesty has the protection of the immortals. He must be fine. Everyone hurriedly knelt down and kowtowed, all of them extremely excited. When they finished kowtowing and raised their heads to look again, Lord Imperial Preceptor and his wife had already flown far away on the auspicious beasts and disappeared into the horizon. Lord Imperial Preceptor is an immortal. Then, the collapse of the mountain just now might not be a bad thing but a good thing. That's right, this mountain has always blocked the way out of the capital. Now it is a flat and smooth road. But why didn't His Majesty come out? Could it be that His Majesty has also been turned into an immortal by Lord Imperial Preceptor? Everyone's discussion gradually faded away and gradually became inaudible. Ning Xuema glanced at the great god beside her. Sure enough, he was still the great god. He just came out of nowhere and solved the big matter of the emperor's disappearance. Chapter 26:14. In the hearts of the people, even if they couldn't find their emperor, they would only think that their emperor had become an immortal and not be smashed to death. The people here still worshipped the great god and wouldn't curse him behind his back. Now that Ning Xuema and the rest had recovered their psychokinesis, they could fly to outer space to find the space door to return to their own era. However, when they first came to this continent, they came out from underground, so they didn't know where the space door to the Tianxi continent was. They were afraid that they would have to search aimlessly in outer space again. Ning Xuema was about to ask the great god if he had a good way to locate it when she suddenly saw a snow-white thing rushing up from the snow below. The heavenly stone. To think that it would actually appear here. Kirin didn't recognize this stone and thought that it was a flying stone. Before the heavenly stone flew in front of him, he slapped it with his claws. What is this? A monstrous wave rushed towards the heavenly stone. Naturally, the heavenly stone wouldn't be hit by the wave. It struck out with a flash of lightning and directly forced the wave back. Kirin was almost hit in the face by his own wave. Fortunately, he reacted quickly. He scratched with his claws and barely managed to retract the wave back. He retracted it too quickly and wet his leg hair. Kirin didn't expect that a stone would dare to challenge him. He glared at the sky and roared, looking like he wanted to fight with the stone. Little Phoenix also didn't want to see his companion at a disadvantage. He opened his eyes wide and fanned out a fire, preparing to refine the stone. The two beasts were used to working together recently. Little Phoenix was responsible for burning the stone. When the stone started to smoke, Kirin would spray ice water at it. Under this alternating cold and hot attack, even if it was a piece of iron, they would still be able to break it into pieces. Now that it was a stone that attacked them, the two beasts were even more excited. Flames and cold water were sprayed towards the heavenly stone. It's just a stone. They didn't believe that they couldn't blow it up under the alternating cold and hot attacks. The heavenly stone had always been worshipped by everyone and was used to being arrogant. It didn't expect that it would be attacked as soon as it appeared in this world. It was also angry and its body flashed with colorful lights, repelling the flames and water back. A bird, a beast, and a stone started to fight in the air. Ning Xuema wanted to stop them when they started to fight, but Xinjiuli stopped her. Let them play. He pulled her away from the battlefield and watched the fight. Ning Xuema said, "Great God, this isn't good, right?" while standing beside the great god to watch the fire. Ever since she reunited with the little Qilin and the little Phoenix, she hadn't really seen them fight. Now she wanted to see how much their martial arts had improved. It was a rare opportunity, the wind and water's fire. Ning Xuema didn't forget to comment. Kirin has grown up in these few hundred years. I remember that when I left it, the water it sprayed out was only as thick as a bowl, but now it's as thick as a bucket. It just needs to control its strength. Little Phoenix is also not bad. This child has become more courageous after following Kirin. When it fights, it knows how to cooperate with its companions. Xinjiuli also slowly interrupted. It's really not bad. It seems that they are a perfect match. Great God, why don't we pair them up? Ning Xuema was excited. Chapter 26:15. It's better to let nature take its course. Xinjiuli tapped the flute on his palm. Great God, the heavenly Tao stone said that you need to help 3 couples. Maybe Kirin and Little Phoenix are one of the couples. They are a good match. Aya, if a Phoenix and a Kirin become husband and wife, what kind of children will they have? A Kirin with Phoenix wings? Or a Phoenix with a Kirin's head? Xinjiuli was speechless. Her imagination was extraordinarily rich. Hey, if you don't ask these two to stop, I won't be polite anymore. The heavenly Tao stone suddenly scrolled in Ning Xuema's mind. It was obviously very angry. The scrolling words were so bright that it could blind people's eyes. Ning Xuema crossed her arms and smiled. If you dare to be rude to them, I'll ask the great God to be rude to you. The heavenly Tao stone, the great God was now a person who only cared about the opposite sex. The heavenly Tao stone really didn't dare to provoke her. It could only use other methods. I'm here to tell you a piece of good news and bring you back. There's a time limit. If you miss the time, therefore Little Phoenix and Kirin who were fighting fiercely just now were stopped by Ning Xuema. Stop fighting, we're on the same side. Little Phoenix, Kirin's eyes widened and blurted out, Master, how did you become on the same side with a broken stone? Little Phoenix also joined in the chaos. Yes, this stone is so abnormal and it doesn't look good. These two sentences completely offended the heavenly Tao stone. Originally, it wanted to leave with the two people and two beasts, but now it refused to take Kirin and Little Phoenix. No matter how Ning Shuema threatened it, it was useless. It was rare that it couldn't be subdued. Kirin was also angry. It tilted its head and said, "If you don't want to take us, then don't. We can go back by ourselves. Master, right? We don't need this broken stone. We can rely on ourselves." Shinjuli looked at it and said calmly, "I didn't expect you to have such ambition." Kirin raised its head. Of course. It did not want to be looked down upon. Little Phoenix also put in a good word for it. "Master, its ability to recognize the way is very strong. We have been to many places in the past few years, and we have not gotten lost many times." Shinjuli looked at the two of them and tapped the Kirin's scales with his flute. "Very good. Then you can go back by yourselves." Kirin, Little Phoenix, Kirin could not take back what he had said. They could only watch helplessly as Shinjuli held Ning Shuema's hand and entered the stone, disappearing without a trace. How unkind. How could he abandon such loyal creatures just like that? Kirin clenched his claws and stared at the rock. It didn't matter, even if it didn't go in, it could still quietly follow the same route as the stone. It and Little Phoenix could still go back. Its current speed was nothing to scoff at. The heavenly Tao stone lit up and suddenly flew out, shooting straight toward the eastern sky. Little Qilin called out to Little Phoenix and immediately followed. They also increased their speed to the extreme. Kirin narrowed its eyes proudly when it saw the stone flying in front of them. Suddenly, the stone circled in place as if it had some malfunction and fell straight down. Poof! It plunged into the snow and disappeared without a trace. Master and the others will be fine, right? It knew that this stone was not reliable. Chapter 26:16. Little Qilin jumped in fright. It retracted its wings and also plunged down. A moment later, Kirin came out of the snow, its eyes full of doubts. "Did you find Master and the others?" Little Phoenix, who was waiting on the ground, rushed over. "No. I saw it fall down. But I looked for it for a long time and I couldn't even find its shadow. I didn't even see the passage it went through. Then what should we do?" Little Phoenix was anxious. "Don't worry, let me think of a way. Maybe the stone is really something and it's petty and doesn't want us to follow it, so forget it, we'll find our own way back. You follow me, don't run around." Kirin took on the responsibility of a man. Little Phoenix still trusted it. The bird and the beast began to find their own way, in the crystal hall in the belly of the heavenly stone. Shinjoli and Ning Shuema sat opposite each other. The heavenly stone had recovered well recently. Although it was running at a high speed, Ning Shuema and the others didn't feel any turbulence. Shinjuli even set up a chessboard and asked Ning Shuema to play a game. Ning Shuema was a little worried about Kirin and the others. "Guru, what if they can't find their way back if we leave them like this?" Shinjuli tapped on the chessboard and analyzed for her. "Didn't you want to pair them up? Now we're giving them a chance. That stupid Kirin will only grow quickly when it has no one to rely on." Ning Shuema thought so too. Kirin had indeed grown a lot after being separated for so many years. He was also more responsible than before. In her mind, Kirin and Little Phoenix were like children. She didn't want to let them go. She was afraid that they would be taken advantage of or kidnapped. But because of this, these two were too dependent on her, which was not conducive to their growth. Perhaps she should really let go of these two and let them grow freely. This was the best for them. Now that these two's martial arts were not low, and their ability to travel through time and space was also very strong, they would not really suffer any losses. It would be good to let them roam alone. Ning Shuema was a person who could take things and let them go easily. Since she had thought it through, she didn't take it to heart. "Congratulations to the two of you for completing the second mission." A line of joyous words appeared on the crystal pillar within the heavenly Tao stone. Ning Shuema was silent for a moment before she asked, "Is the marriage between Kirin and Little Phoenix the second task?" The second mission was too simple. It didn't seem like the heavenly Tao style at all. Unexpectedly, the heavenly Tao stone retorted with a bunch of exclamation marks. Then it retorted with the correct answer, "No, no. The second task that this stone is talking about is not them. They are not qualified. I'm talking about Sir God Rongyu." Ning Shuema was surprised. "Sir God Rongyu is?" "Rongyu Tianlan," Shinjoli, who was beside him, answered slowly. "Rongyu Tianlan? I don't remember fulfilling his wish." At this point, Ning Shuema's big black eyes suddenly widened. She finally reacted, Could it be? Could it be that Jun Liuya is Rongyue Tianlan? It can't be. Isn't he still alive and well? How did he become Jun Liuya? This was too strange. However, Ning Xuema thought about Jun Liuya's character and bearing carefully. He did resemble Rongyue Tianlan a little. But they didn't look alike. Otherwise, she would have recognized him at a glance. Chapter 26:17. Shen Jiuli tapped the chessboard with his finger and said, Play this game with me and I'll tell you. Ning Xuema's curiosity was piqued. She immediately grabbed a chess piece and said, Come on. The two of them played the game very quickly. Ning Xuema also lost very quickly. After one game, Ning Xuema pushed the chessboard and said, Guru, tell me, what's going on? Shen Jiuli was too lazy to talk. He waved his hand and a white light flashed. The crystal pillar next to them flashed some images like a movie screen. Under a bright red swaying tree, two people were sitting opposite each other and playing chess. One was wearing a white robe and the other was wearing a blue robe. Both of them had outstanding looks and an outstanding bearing. Sitting under the tree they looked particularly eye-catching. Ning Xuemo recognized that the white-robed person was Shen Jiuli, and the blue-robed person was Rongyue Shenlin. The battle on the chessboard was fierce, and the black and white pieces were fighting happily. The chessboard was like a battlefield, and it was also particular about the arrangement of troops. The chess player was like the marshal controlling the troops. Shen Jiuli's white pieces already had the advantage, and Rongyue Shenlin's black pieces were stubbornly resisting. Suddenly Shen Jiuli seemed to have sensed something. He waved his sleeve and a water mirror appeared in front of him. The water mirror showed the scene of Dizun appearing in the cities of various countries. Of course, the Dizun that appeared in the water mirror was Shen Jiuli's substitute, Wu Mo. He sat in a palanquin, and his bearing were not much different from Shen Jiuli's. The commoners outside knelt down to welcome him, and the scene was very solemn and grand. Rongyue Shenlin also took a look at the water mirror. She waved her fan and smiled. Dizwa, you've done a good job as a substitute. However, there's something I don't understand and I want to ask you for advice. Shen Jiuli turned the chess piece in his hand and didn't raise his head. Speak. Dizwa, if you want the commoners to live and work in peace, why not unify the continent? There will be fewer wars. Once the mainland is unified, there will be no competition. The regime will decay and decline, and the people will have no way to make a living. Once the corruption reaches the extreme, the people will have no way to survive and will rise up in revolt. At that time, the warlords will be divided and there will be endless chaos. It's better to have three sides. It was rare for Shen Jiuli to say so much. Rong Yuetian put down a chess piece. He did not agree with Dizun's argument. The two of them continued to play chess while debating, but neither of them managed to convince the other. In the end, Rong Yuetianlan chuckled. If I am reincarnated as a human, I will definitely unify the mainland and create a peaceful and prosperous world. Shen Jiuli casually placed a piece to decide the outcome. Yes, let's wait and see. A gust of wind blew over, blowing away countless red petals that danced around the two of them. It was quite a scene. The scene gradually faded away. Ning Xuema looked at the picture on the crystal pillar and suddenly realized, could it be that your debate with him made him want to enter the secular world? Is that why he reincarnated as Jun Liuya? That can't be right. Rongyue Tianlan is still perfectly fine on Carefree Island. How did he reincarnate? Shen Jiuli waved his hand and removed the picture. I have known him for many years and have debated many things. But neither of us cared. Rongyue Tian probably also thought that he didn't care, so he never mentioned it again. It wasn't until later that I was seriously injured while picking herbs. Before I fainted, I contacted him and he rushed over to save me. Although he succeeded in saving me, he was also seriously injured. Because of this, he went into seclusion for over a dozen years. During his seclusion, something went wrong. Ning Xuema's heart stirred. She was a bit startled. Chapter 26:18. She knew when Shen Jiuli was referring to the time when she was severely injured while picking herbs. It was the time when the Almighty went to the lava land to pick herbs in order to get rid of the demon in her body. Before the Almighty left, he told her to wait for half a month. In the end, she waited for him for 10 years instead. What happened? He was too heavily injured. When he was meditating to recover, he accidentally went berserk. Although he later adjusted himself, a part of his soul escaped. That's why he came out a few years later than he originally said he would. Ning Xuema was stunned for a moment. The part of his soul that escaped couldn't be Jun Liuya, right? Shinjuli said indifferently, the one that escaped was his second soul, concealed arrow, which is also a battle soul. Perhaps the debate between him and me that day caused this soul to become obsessed, so it floated to this cloud underworld continent and reincarnated as Jun Liuya. Since he's a part of Rong Yu's soul, why doesn't he look like her at all? Ning Shuima asked. The soul has no appearance. Since he was reincarnated, he naturally resembles his parents in this life. It's normal that he doesn't look like his original body. So that's how it is. Since he was reincarnated as a battle soul, his natural mission was to become famous through battle. In his heart, the empire would always be first. That's why Jiyu ended up like this. Ning Shuima finally understood the ins and outs of the matter. She couldn't help but sigh. Fate makes fools of people. No wonder this Jun Liuya inexplicably believed that the great god had a resurrection technique. It turned out that he used to be the great god's old friend. In this life he came into this life because of the great god. No wonder he was also counted in the great god's account, allowing him to set things right. She seemed to have thought of something. Since he's the reincarnation of Rong Yu's soul, does his death mean that he's returned to his original body? Shinjuli poured 2 cups of tea out of nowhere and handed one to Ning Shuema. He then lazily replied, whether he's returned or not, we'll know when we see him. All right, Ning Shuema didn't want to delve into this question. She was going to see him in person soon anyway. She had another question. Great God, when did you realize that he was Island Master Rong Yu? Shinjuli said, not much earlier than you. After entering his dream. Although the Almighty was a highly intelligent person, he didn't really care about mortals. He couldn't be bothered with most things. Unless someone did something that really piqued his interest, he would thoroughly investigate and deduce. Ning Shuema didn't think that she would see Rong Yu at Tianlan so soon. She had only taken a nap, and as she awoke she discovered that she was standing in a square of carefree island that was covered with all sorts of strange flowers and plants. She felt that the stone was trembling as if it was frightened by something. She curiously looked outside through the crystal and saw Rong Yuetian carrying a bright chisel and walking around the stone. She looked quite excited and was even muttering, this stone actually emerged from the ground on its own. Looking at it, it looks like it's carrying precious jade. Could it be that it's automatically sending money to me? Would this island master be able to cut out a peerless piece of jade with a chisel? Perhaps it's another jade annulus of He clan? Ning Shuema, the heavenly Tao stone could no longer remain calm. It hurriedly sent out a line of words. Hurry up and leave. Shinjuli wasn't worried at all. He tapped the crystal with his flute and said, you don't usually show your face, so why did you suddenly come out of the ground? The heavenly Tao stone nearly cried. I wasn't careful and drilled over the top. As Rongyue Tianlan's chisel was about to sink in, the heavenly Tao stone recklessly opened an exit. Chapter 26:19. Shinjuli smiled. Then he held Ning Shuema's hand and walked out slowly. The autumn wind was refreshing and the flowers bloomed beautifully. Under the worryless tree, Rongyu Ishinlin asked the little boy to prepare a table of food. The food was sumptuous and the fruits and vegetables were very nutritious. There were a few rare treasures. Ning Shuema ate to her heart's content. Shinjuli saw that she ate to her heart's content, so he was satisfied too. Rongyu Ishinlin had already put away his chisel. At this moment he was waving a fan. Are the two of you satisfied with the food? Can you satisfy my curiosity? The two of you obviously returned to Buddha Lotus Mountain to see your disciples. How did you come out of the stone in the blink of an eye? That stone, is it a female? The heavenly law stone, which had been too lazy to bother with idle people, couldn't help but strike Rongyu Ishinlin with a bolt of lightning. Rongyu Ishinlin was surprised. He waved his fan and the bolt of lightning struck his fan. With a swoosh, a hole appeared on the surface of the fan. Rongyu Ishinlin's fan looked ordinary, but it was actually a treasured fan. Not to mention the other flashy functions, its sturdiness alone could defeat all shields. No divine weapon would be able to leave a single mark on it. Now it was burned by a bolt of lightning from a stone. Rongyu Ishinlin was so distressed that he wanted to kick the stone to the sky. Where did this stone spirit come from? Rongyu Ishinlin looked at the heavenly law stone unkindly. Tell this ignorant person that I am the heavenly law stone. The one in charge of the heavenly law. Not some stone spirit. Stone spirit is not even fit to wipe my shell. The heavenly law stone kept saying to Ning Shuema and Shinjuli in their hearts. Ning Shuema smiled and said, didn't you say that your identity shouldn't be revealed in this world? Why are you letting me say it now? The heavenly lost stone was speechless. It was depressed. Suddenly, it drilled into the ground and disappeared in the blink of an eye. Rongyue Tianlan looked at her own piece of land that didn't even have an ant's nest left behind. She then looked at Xinjiuli and Luo Binghe. Both of you, can you tell Xiaoxian what's going on? Where did the stone go? He could see through all invisibility spells, so the stone should not be invisible. Xinjiuli didn't care. Don't worry about it. It's going to conserve energy. If Xinjiuli didn't want to talk about it, even a diamond drill wouldn't be able to pry it open. Rongyue Tian had no choice but to give up. The three of them drank for a while. Ning Xuema looked at Rongyue Tianlan's blue robe that was faintly inlaid with gold. She smiled and said, Island Master Rongyue, you look quite shiny today. Xinjiuli turned the wine glass and looked at Rongyue Tianlan up and down. He said slowly, Rongyue, congratulations on successfully passing the tribulation and becoming a mighty immortal. Rongyue Tianlan rolled up her sleeves. Thank you, thank you. Ning Xuema thought of the extremely abnormal thunderbolts and lightning that she saw when the Wangchuan Peak collapsed in Jiyue Nation. Her heart skipped a beat. Could that lightning be the thunder of his tribulation? The commotion caused by the battle was truly huge. She didn't know if his original body was struck by lightning. Ning Xuema looked at Rongyue Tianlan's expression and asked the question in her heart, were you struck by lightning during your tribulation? Rongyue Tianlan pondered for a while. She rubbed the space between her eyebrows with her fan. This matter is a little strange. I was supposed to be struck by golden lightning when I passed the tribulation to become a mighty immortal. However, maybe because I wasn't on the mainland, I was only struck by lightning in my dream. What's more strange is that in my dream, I was still fighting with my strength to attract the lightning. It was as if I was seeking death. Chapter 26:20. Luckily it was just a dream. When I woke up, I realized that I was still on the bed, but there was a mark on my body indicating that I had successfully passed the tribulation. Ever since he was born, he had gone through all kinds of tribulations. As his level increased, the tribulations he went through became more and more intense. The last time he went through the tribulation, he was almost turned into a piece of charcoal by the divine thunder. Even his parents couldn't recognize him. He had always been lazy and didn't have any big ambitions. He just liked to travel and play. He felt that his ability as a monarch god was enough for him to do these things freely. Therefore, after he became a monarch god, he stopped cultivating. Every day he just made tea and incense. He was very carefree. However, he didn't expect that when a person was lucky, even the gods couldn't stop him. He actually succeeded in passing the tribulation in his dream. After he woke up, not a single strand of his hair was out of place. This made him very gratified. The only thing that made him unhappy was that some irrelevant images would occasionally appear in his mind. Although they were fragmented, his usually peaceful mind was affected. What made him even more confused was that when he woke up, he realized that his face was full of tears. He felt an inexplicable sense of loss in his heart. It was as if he had lost something very important and couldn't find it back. Obviously, he succeeded in passing the tribulation in his dream and didn't suffer much. It should have been something worth celebrating, but his mood was very low. Thus, he wandered around the courtyard to get rid of his bad mood. In the end, he saw the heavenly path stone drill out from the ground like a cannonball. Rong Yuishenlin and Xinjiuli were good friends, so Rong Yuishenlin had nothing to fear from Xinjiuli. He told Dizwa about what had happened after he had passed the heavenly tribulation. In the end, he said, Dizwa, don't you think that passing the heavenly tribulation and becoming a mighty immortal is something worth celebrating? Why am I always in a bad mood? Xinjiuli pondered for a moment and replied with 3 words, Are you homesick? Rong Yuishenlin was speechless. Xinjiuli added, If you miss home, then go back. In any case, you have become a supreme immortal. Now that you go back, you can be considered returning home in glory. Rong Yuishenlin sneered and opened his fan. I'm not interested in returning home in glory. My family might not be looking forward to me returning home in glory. Xinjiuli slowly took a sip of wine and said, That's not necessarily true. Your little fiancé might be looking forward to your return in glory. Rong Yuetian choked on her tea. A moment later, he rubbed his forehead and helplessly said, Dizwa, you are making fun of Xiaoxian again. That girl's milk is still there, so do you know what it means to return home in glory? Xinjiuli looked at him thoughtfully and didn't say anything. Rongyue Tianlan was a little flustered by his scrutiny. She tidied her clothes and asked, Why is Dizwa looking at me like that? Xinjiuli leisurely sized him up from head to toe and then from toe to head. Only then did he slowly open his mouth and say, "From what I see, there should be a red Luan star movement in you recently. The peach blossom should be blooming soon." Rongyue Tianlan waved her fan and smiled elegantly. "I won't hide it from Dizhua. This little deity's luck with women has always been flourishing. Every time I go out I always attract one or two." Shin Jiuli said, "The peach blossoms this time are different. Your fated one should be arriving." Rongyue Tianlan was startled. He knew that Shin Jiuli was proficient in algebra, and nothing that he said wasn't true. Rongyue Tianlan immediately became interested. "Then may I ask Dizhua, who is this little deity's fated one?" As he asked this, a pale pink figure flashed across his mind. His heart inexplicably twisted. Chapter 26-21. He originally wanted to make a joke about the ancestor, but after that beautiful figure flashed by, he couldn't make that joke anymore. Shin Jiuli kept him in suspense at this time. Heaven's secret can't be revealed. Rongyue Tianlan sat in place for a moment and suddenly sighed, "Maybe I should really go back." Shin Jiuli raised his eyebrows and looked at him. Rongyue Tianlan continued, "It's better for me to go back and think of a way to cancel that marriage." Shin Jiuli smiled and didn't say anything. Ning Xuema was curious. Although she had known Rongyue Tianlan for a long time, she knew very little about his background. She only knew that he didn't belong to any sect and didn't participate in any affairs of this continent. He was very free and easy. She thought he was like the Almighty, born without parents on this continent. It turned out that he also had a family and even a fiancé. She didn't know what his family was. She hadn't heard of any powerful family on this continent with the surname Rongyue. Island Master Rongyue actually has a family? I wonder which country it is in. Listening to your conversation, you have a fiancé? Ning Xuema asked. Rongyue Tianlan sighed and said, "I originally didn't belong to this continent. I escaped from my marriage." "Forget it, your husband knows this. Let him tell you." He seemed somewhat dispirited and helpless. Ning Xuema looked at the Almighty beside her and then looked at him again. She said decisively, "The Almighty's words are too concise and comprehensive. I want to hear more details. It's better if you say it yourself. Who knows, I might be able to give you some ideas." She didn't want to listen to stories from Shin Jiuli's mouth. The Almighty only gave a brief summary of the story. 2 or 3 sentences could summarize a person's life. What kind of story with ups and downs was like plain water in his mouth? Her words made Rongyue Tianlan very happy. He waved his fan and laughed. "Dizhua, why don't I say it myself?" Shin Jiuli glanced at him lightly and said indifferently, "His story is actually quite boring. You don't have to listen to his embellishment. I'll tell you. He was indeed not from this continent. He came from the Sanskrit continent and was the 8th son of the Eastern Sky Great Emperor who was in charge of the world's flowers and plants. The Eastern Sky's Big Emperor system is hereditary. The son inherits the father's business. The 3 older brothers above all have great talent and bold vision, fighting for the position of crown prince until their heads are broken and blood is shed. This island master Rongyu is relatively aloof from worldly affairs, and did not participate in this inheritance war. However, he has many crafty ideas, wide connections and strong martial arts. He is the object of the 3 older brothers' struggle to win over, causing this island master Rongyu to be unable to bear it any longer. He has always been traveling outside, not participating in political disputes. More than 3,000 years ago the Eastern Sky King, I don't know who he believed, but he said that the daughter of the Southern Sky King's family was not only beautiful, but also had the ability to bring prosperity to her husband's family. As a result, the Eastern Sky King had the idea of a marriage alliance with the Southern Sky King. It just so happened that Island Master Rongyu's 3 elder brothers had already married their first wives, so the important task of forming a marriage alliance fell on Island Master Rongyu. Island Master Rongyu didn't want to be a chess piece and refused to agree. Being urged by the Eastern Sky King in all kinds of ways, he had no choice but to flee without a trace. With this escape, he directly escaped from the Fanine continent and came here. It was rare for the great god to say so much in one breath, so Ning Xuema wasn't stingy in giving him a thumbs up. She then turned her head to look at Rongyu Enlan. "Island Master Rongyu, I feel that you being used as a chess piece for a marriage alliance is quite tragic and not in line with your style. However, since the rumor has it that the daughter of the Southern Sky King is beautiful, and also has the life of bringing prosperity to her husband, then it definitely can't be bad." Chapter 26-22. Island Lord Rongyue, I think it's sad that you were used as a chess piece in a marriage alliance. It doesn't suit your style. But since it's rumored that the daughter of the Southern Heaven Great Emperor is beautiful and has the fortune of bringing good fortune to her husband, she can't be bad. Maybe she's the most beautiful woman in the world. Why don't you meet her first? Maybe she's really the right person for you? Rongyue Tianlan sneered. Beautiful? Her elder sisters may be beautiful, but is she ugly? Not necessarily. She was only half a year old when the marriage was proposed. She was still a little girl whose teeth hadn't grown out yet. Ning Xuema. That's too perverted. They actually allowed you to molest a baby. Rongyue Tianlan? His lips twitched. You can't say that. In fact, it was only an engagement at that time. If they wanted to get married, they had to wait until she was an adult. Well, you said you needed to break off the engagement. Did you run away after the engagement? Rongyue Tianlan shook his head. No, I ran away first. My family used my birth characters to propose marriage, and the other party agreed. Shinjuli slowly added, according to the rules of the Fanine continent, once a man and a woman are engaged, they will automatically be engraved on a specific totem pole. Unless both parties voluntarily break off the engagement, they can't remarry. If they break the contract, they will be severely punished by the totem pole. Rongyue Tianlan was surprised. Dizwa, how do you know so much about the Fanine continent? He didn't tell Shinjuli about these things. Shinjuli took a sip of tea. A few years ago, I accidentally went there and saw your family. Rongyue Tianlan almost dropped the fan in his hand. Dizwa, how come I've never heard you mention it? Shinjuli didn't have any expression on his face, because I'm not a gossipy person. Rongyue Tianlan, Shinjuli leisurely added, since you're curious, I'll tell you more. Your family has never given up looking for you for so many years. The little princess engraved on the pillar of marriage with you is also looking for you while gnashing her teeth. Rongyue Tian was puzzled. She's just a little girl who hasn't even shed her hair. Why is she looking for me? Shinjuli placed the flute in his hand on Rongyue Tianlan's shoulder and said earnestly, she also wants to break off the engagement with you. Also, she's now 3,000 years old. In the Fanine continent, this age is already considered an old lady. Now that you have escaped, you are free and unfettered, but she has no choice but to live in the name of your fiancé. When you escaped back then, in order to make the marriage proposal go smoothly, your imperial father said that you were only going out to study and would return in 300 to 500 years. Later on, he said that you were in a critical stage of cultivation and dragged it on for another few hundred years. Just like that, the princess has turned into an old maid. Ning Xuema was indignant on behalf of the girl. Rongyue, you are too unkind. You forcefully dragged a cute little girl into an old maid. This hatred isn't small. You can't blame her for gnashing her teeth and looking for you. Shinjuli flicked his sleeves and added fuel to the fire. It's fine if it's just dragging her into an old maid. The most terrible thing is the rumors about her. What rumors? Ning Xuema echoed him. Because he ran away from the marriage and didn't come back for thousands of years, the people of the Fanine continent spread rumors that this girl must have a hidden disease that can't be seen. She actually made her fiancé run away from the marriage and not come back for so many years. Chapter 26-23. Ning Xuema clenched her fists. This rumor is really terrible. It must be very difficult for a girl to live with such a reputation. She probably wants to chop her fiancé into pieces. Rongyue Tianlan was speechless. He finally sighed. Forget it. I'll go back and solve this matter in a few days. Actually, 3,000 years old is not considered an old lady. As long as this engagement is cancelled, she can still find a good family to marry. Shinjuli asked him, you haven't even seen the girl, and you've already made up your mind to cancel the engagement? Rongyue Tianlan was stunned. The figure of the girl in pink flashed across his mind again. He couldn't see the face of the girl in pink clearly, but he inexplicably agreed with her. He felt that if his red Luan star really moved, it should be because of the girl in pink. Then there was no need to delay the other girl. After all, the girl was also innocent. When he went back, he would explain this matter while canceling the engagement. He would tell the world that it was his fault and not the girl's fault. If possible, he could also be a matchmaker for the girl. He had many friends in the Fanine continent, and there was no lack of outstanding young talents among them. Since you don't mean to, then there's no need to meet. Rongyue Tianlan's answer was straightforward. Even though he felt sorry for the girl, he could only cut the Gordian knot. The banquet didn't end until the moon rose in the east. Early the next morning, Rangyuishanlin came to Shinjoli with 2 dark circles under his eyes. He entrusted all the flowers, birds, insects, and fish on his island to Shinjoli as if he was an orphan. He was afraid that Shinjoli didn't understand these things, so he made a detailed list of all kinds of taboos. Ning Shuama looked at the lines of words and felt a little dizzy. "Island Lord, are you going to be gone for a long time?" Rangyuishanlin sighed. "The Fanning continent is a little far from here. It will take a few months on the road. Besides, canceling the engagement will implicate some people. I have to deal with it properly before I can come back." "When are you leaving?" Shinjoli didn't look at the list. "No." Rangyuishanlin bowed to Shinjoli, turned around, and strode out. It turns out that he's also an impatient person. Ning Shuama couldn't help but laugh. He actually came back just like that. "He's probably afraid of wasting a day of the girl's youth," Shinjoli replied. "He's been delayed for more than 3,000 years, so he's not in a hurry. However, Almighty, his battle soul should have returned, right? He had already succeeded in transcending the tribulation. But from the looks of it, he doesn't seem to remember Jiyu." Ning Shuama thought of the pitiful girl and felt a little sad. Once the soul returns, it will not have any memories. It's not strange that he doesn't remember. Shinjoli explained to her. Then their story will truly come to an end there. What a pity. I always thought that they would have a happy ending. Ning Shuama sighed. Shinjoli held her in his arms and said, 9 out of 10 things in the world don't go your way. How can there be so many beautiful flowers and full moons? Sai, I can only blame Jun Liuye for being too greedy for power and being too jealous. If he had quietly told Jiyu when he was supervising the execution of Jiyu Nation's monarch and his wife, she wouldn't have gone crazy. Maybe they could have been loving each other for the rest of their lives. Even if it was because of jealousy that he didn't say anything in advance when he wanted to punish her, he should have exposed Jiyu's conspiracy when she came to find him after she woke up. Chapter 26-24. Since he had seen through Jiyu's plot, he should have exposed it on the spot, or told Jiyu the truth that her parents were not dead. That way, even if Jiyu did not believe it, she would still want to verify it. Then there would not have been any later. However, after he saw through it, he immediately came up with another plan. He wanted to use Jiyu's revenge to lure out the king of Xingyu country and eliminate him. For this, he did not hesitate to use the trick of injuring himself. He did succeed, killing 2 birds with 1 stone. He thought this was a good plan that could let Jiyu vent her anger and also get rid of his opponent. However, he did not know that after Jiyu killed him, she became disheartened and activated the poison in her body, making things completely irreversible. Shinjoli said, the reincarnation of a warrior's soul is his first instinct. It was originally an accident that he fell in love with Princess Jiyu. Then, great God, did Princess Jiyu's soul really dissipate? Ning Shuama was still confused about this. Shinjoli smiled and said slowly, actually, Princess Jiyu's origin is similar to Jun Liuye's. Ning Shuama's heart skipped a beat. She reacted quickly and immediately said, could it be that she is also the reincarnation of a goddess? Shinjoli said, smart girl. However, it might not be a soul dissipation. He peeled a walnut and put it in her hand as a reward. Ning Shuama's curiosity was piqued. She grabbed his hand and asked, which goddess? Do we know each other? If it's not a soul dissipation, then what is it? Shinjoli curved his lips. Maybe it's an obsession or maybe it's an out-of-body dream. He then added, I heard that Rong Yu's fiancé is called Ji Xinyu. Pada. The teacup in Ning Shuama's hand fell to the ground. It seemed to be a little lively. The mountain was not high, but it was famous because of immortals. The water was not deep, but it was famous because of dragons. Although the immortal cloud mountain had the word, immortal, in its name, it was actually a barren place. Throughout history, only demons and devils resided there. Occasionally, an immortal would appear, and they were all here to vanquish demons and devils. In the depths of the immortal cloud mountain, there was a coiling dragon stream. Within the coiling dragon stream, there was indeed a flood dragon that was said to have cultivated for 1,000 years. This flood dragon was a passing flood dragon. It came here a year ago. Probably because the scenery here was to its liking, it actually stayed here and didn't leave. This flood dragon was extremely ferocious. It had the ability to spit out clouds and mist. Whatever it saw, it would swallow. Most of the creatures in the mountain had been swallowed by it. Even the various demons and devils had been swallowed by it. Not only that, but it also often went down the mountain to eat the passers-by. After the demonic wind passed, an entire village would become its food. This immortal cloud mountain was the South Heaven Thearch's territory. With such a ferocious creature appearing in his territory, the South Heaven the Arch naturally had a headache. He sent many capable soldiers and experts to get rid of it. However, this flood dragon was too powerful and too cunning. These people were either not its match and were swallowed by it, or it escaped in advance after receiving the news. After searching the entire mountain, they couldn't find it. In this way, this flood dragon became a huge problem for the South Heaven the Arch. However, he didn't have a way to get rid of it. He could only order all the villagers within a dozen miles of the immortal cloud mountain to be moved out. The immortal cloud mountain was also strictly prohibited from entering and exiting. The South Heaven Thearch's side was proficient in fire techniques. However, this flood dragon was of the water element. Moreover, this water element was not small. Water could suppress fire, so the people on the South Heaven Thearch's side suffered a lot from this flood dragon. The South Heaven the Arch had 4 daughters. The eldest and second daughters were all married, and they married very well. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.